It did not begin with a roar. It began with a problem. By the time the German army pushed deep into the Soviet Union, it had already learned something unsettling. Speed alone was no longer enough. Soviet armor was improving. Anti-tank guns were multiplying. The battlefield was thickening. What had once been a war of maneuver was turning into a war of penetration, not just through lines, but through resistance that refused to collapse. The answer, at least in theory, would be heavier steel and longer guns. Out of that pressure came the Tiger. When the first Tiger tanks entered combat in late 1942, they were not fielded in mass divisions. They were organized into separate heavy tank battalions, independent formations meant to be attached where crisis or opportunity demanded. These battalions were conceived as blunt instruments, concentrated shock power designed to rupture fortified positions, blunt enemy offensives, or stabilize sectors under extreme strain. The Tiger was unlike anything that had preceded it. Thick frontal armor capable of resisting most contemporary anti-tank fire, an 88mm gun that could destroy opposing armor at ranges many enemies could not match. A presence that was both physical and psychological. When Tiger tanks appeared on the horizon, they often changed the calculation before a shot was fired. But power carries weight. Tiger tank battalions were never numerous. Production was limited. Mechanical complexity was high. Fuel consumption was immense. Recovery of damaged vehicles required significant effort. Each battalion was a concentration of elite crews and scarce machinery, and every loss was felt sharply. On the Eastern Front, Tiger battalions were first committed in difficult terrain and under harsh conditions. Mud swallowed tracks. Mechanical failures competed with enemy fire. Yet when positioned effectively, these heavy tanks demonstrated formidable defensive and offensive capability. In battles such as those around Leningrad, Kharkov, and later Kursk, Tiger units became the armored spearheads or anchors upon which entire operations depended. At Kursk in 1943, heavy tank battalions were integrated into larger offensive formations. The battle exposed both their strengths and their limits. Tigers could dominate open ground and destroy enemy armor at distance, but they were vulnerable to mines, artillery, and coordinated anti-tank defenses layered in depth. When momentum stalled, their weight and fuel demands became liabilities. As the war progressed, Tiger battalions were increasingly deployed as fire brigades. They were rushed to threatened sectors. They were committed to counterattacks, designed to restore broken fronts. They were used to stiffen defenses where a collapse seemed imminent. In Normandy, Tiger battalions confronted a different battlefield. Narrow roads, hedgerows, constant air threat. Their heavy armor could still withstand much enemy fire, but Allied air superiority and artillery coordination eroded the conditions under which Tigers could maneuver freely. Many were lost not in dramatic duels, but through immobilization, fuel shortages, or encirclement. On the Eastern Front, the story grew harsher. Yet Soviet production expanded dramatically. Anti-tank tactics improved. Coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery tightened. Tigers remained dangerous, sometimes devastating in localized engagements, but they were no longer decisive in shaping the strategic direction of the war. The heavy tank battalions could win battles of position. They could not reverse the larger tide. The men who crewed the Tigers developed reputations for discipline and tactical skill. Tank commanders learned to maximize terrain, to exploit long sight lines, to withdraw before encirclement closed. Some battalions achieved high numbers of enemy vehicles destroyed, becoming symbols of armored resilience. But symbols do not alter mathematics. Fuel grew scarce. Replacements diminished. Mechanical strain accumulated. By the final years of the war, the Tiger battalions fought primarily in defensive roles, attempting to delay advances that could no longer be stopped entirely. In Hungary, in the Ardennes, in the final defense of German territory, heavy tank units were thrown into battles where their firepower could still inflict losses, but where survival itself became uncertain. The Tiger tank battalions were both formidable and fragile. They represented the peak of German armored engineering and the limits of sustaining such engineering in a prolonged industrial war. Their existence demonstrated what concentrated technological superiority could achieve in tactical engagements. Their fate demonstrated what happens when production, logistics, and air superiority tilt decisively against you. The entire history of Tiger tank battalions in World War II is not a simple tale of invincibility or collapse. It is a study in contrast, in how dominance at the point of contact does not guarantee control of the campaign, in how battlefield fear does not translate automatically into strategic advantage, in how machines, no matter how powerful, are bound by fuel, terrain, and time. The Tiger was never the war itself. It was a tool, sometimes devastating, often overextended, always dependent on the broader structure around it. From their first deployments in the East to their final defensive actions amid ruins, Tiger tank battalions embodied the tension between technological ambition and logistical reality. This is the entire history of Tiger tank battalions in World War II, a story of heavy steel, limited numbers, a tactical dominance, and the unyielding pressure of a war too large for any single weapon to decide. Before continuing, pause for a moment and notice where you are. Is your space steady and quiet, or does it carry the low movement of everyday life? Has your day just begun, or are you settling into its later hours? Let yourself register the feeling of the moment, not just the time itself. Those crews fought inside steel that shook with every impact. Let this story unfold at a pace that allows you to feel its weight. Summer, 1942. The North African sun beats down on a British armored column, advancing through the desert near Tobruk. Tank Commander Lieutenant Harrison peers through his periscope, watching the horizon shimmer in waves of heat. His Crusader tank, reliable enough against Italian armor, rumbles forward with confidence born from months of successful engagements. Then something appears in the distance that shouldn't exist. A German tank, massive beyond anything in the recognition manuals, sits hull down behind a dune. Harrison orders his gunner to fire. The 2-pounder shell screams toward the target at point-blank range, 800 meters. It strikes the enemy tank's frontal armor with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. The shell ricochets skyward, leaving barely a scratch. Harrison's gunner fires again. Another ricochet. The German tank doesn't move, doesn't flinch, just sits there absorbing punishment that should have destroyed it twice over. Then it rotates its turret, slowly, deliberately, like a predator deciding which prey to take first. The gun flash comes before the sound. Harrison's wingman, another Crusader tank, explodes in a fountain of flame and metal. Within minutes, 3 British tanks lie burning in the sand. Harrison's crew abandons their vehicle and runs, certain that standing and fighting means death. Back at headquarters, Harrison files his report with hands still shaking from adrenaline. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel N.W. Duncan, reads the description with skepticism. A German tank that weighs, Harrison estimates, perhaps 50 tons? That can shrug off British anti-tank rounds at combat ranges? That destroys Crusaders with a single shot? Duncan marks the report, unconfirmed, requires verification, and files it away. He's read too many combat reports where exhausted men see things that aren't there, where fear transforms ordinary threats into supernatural ones. But the reports keep coming. At September 1942, another British unit encounters the same mysterious vehicle. January 1943, a captured German officer, bored during routine interrogation in Cairo, mentions the new 56-ton tank as casually as someone discussing the weather. The interrogator writes it down, but assumes it's propaganda, the kind of boasting designed to demoralize Allied troops. February 1943. British Army intelligence distributes an updated tank recognition manual. Buried in the back pages, alongside sketches of known German vehicles, appears a single unclear photograph. The caption reads, "Possible new heavy tank. Existence unconfirmed. Treat reports with skepticism." March 1943 marks the turning point. 3 separate British armored units, and it operating independently across a 100-kilometer front, file identical reports within 48 hours. All describe the same vehicle, a massive German tank with armor no British gun can penetrate. All report their armor-piercing rounds ricocheting harmlessly off its hull. All describe watching their own tanks explode under its fire while being unable to inflict any damage in return. An intelligence officer at British Middle East Command, Captain James Whitworth, spreads the reports across his desk and realizes something extraordinary. These aren't isolated incidents or cases of combat fatigue. Something real is out there, hunting British armor with impunity. The tank they're encountering is the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger I, though the British don't know its name yet. It weighs 56.9 tons, fully loaded with ammunition and fuel, making it more than twice as heavy as most British tanks in the desert. Its main gun, the 88mm KWK-36, can penetrate the frontal armor of a British Crusader at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The Crusader's 2-pounder gun, effective enough against Italian tanks and early German panzers, cannot penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at any practical combat range. It's an asymmetrical mismatch, a heavyweight boxer facing opponents who can't hurt him. The unit operating these machines is Schwerpanzerabteilung 501, Heavy Tank Battalion 501 in English, the first Tiger unit ever deployed in combat. They arrived in North Africa with just 6 tanks. Oh, a tiny force that should barely register in a theater where hundreds of tanks clash regularly. But their impact far exceeds their numbers. Each Tiger engagement becomes a disproportionate event, a moment where normal combat mathematics break down. British commanders start warning their subordinates. If you encounter this new tank, don't engage frontally. Retreat. Call for air support. Wait for reinforcements. Direct confrontation means death. British Army Intelligence Summary from December 1942 marked special intelligence and distributed only to senior officers, finally acknowledges the reality. The Germans have deployed a new heavy tank with capabilities that exceed anything in the Allied arsenal. The report doesn't yet know the vehicle's proper designation, referring to it only as German heavy tank. Type unknown. But the specifications are sobering. Frontal armor estimated at 100 millimeters, approximately 2.5 times thicker than the Crusader's maximum protection of 40 millimeters. A gun that can destroy British tanks at ranges where British guns are ineffective. Mobility that, despite the vehicle's weight, allows it to reposition and escape before Allied forces can coordinate responses. The intelligence summary raises more questions than it answers. How many of these tanks does Germany possess? Are the 6 vehicles in North Africa the entire production run, or merely an advance guard for hundreds more? What other capabilities might this machine possess that battlefield reports haven't yet revealed? Why did German High Command maintain such operational security that even captured German officers mention it casually, as if it's common knowledge within the Wehrmacht? The answers to these questions will emerge slowly, painfully, through months of combat and intelligence gathering. But in the winter of 1942 to 1943, British commanders face a simpler, more immediate problem. They're fighting a weapon they can't defeat. The rumor has become reality. Somewhere in German factories, engineers have created a tank that breaks all the rules, that renders obsolete every assumption about armored warfare that the British Army spent years developing. The Tiger isn't just a better tank. It's a different category of weapon entirely, one that forces the Allies to rethink their entire approach to mechanized combat. And the most terrifying part? Nobody knows yet whether this is Germany's final answer to Allied armor, or merely the beginning of something worse. The rumor has arrived. The legend is about to begin. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa crashes across the Soviet border like a tsunami of steel and fire. German panzer columns race eastward, expecting to replicate the easy victories they achieved in France, Poland, and the Low Countries. The Wehrmacht's intelligence assessments predict Soviet collapse within weeks, perhaps months at most. Tank crews climb into their Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks confident that German engineering superiority will carry them to Moscow by autumn. Then, near the city of Smolensk, they encounter something that shouldn't exist. A German panzer company, 12 tanks strong, encounters a Soviet armored column. The Germans open fire at standard combat ranges, 800 to 1,000 meters. Their shells strike Soviet tanks and ricochet. Panzer commanders, veterans of France and Poland, stare through their periscopes in disbelief. The Soviet tanks don't stop, don't slow down, just keep advancing through German fire as if the shells are raindrops. These are T-34 medium tanks, with sloped armor that deflects German rounds and a 76mm gun that penetrates German armor with ease. Within minutes, 7 German tanks are burning. The survivors retreat in chaos. A panzer company commander named Hauptmann Wolfgang Fischer files a combat report that lands on General Heinz Guderian's desk within days. Fischer's description is stark. He is almost desperate. The Russian T-34 is a complete surprise. Our shells bounce off like peas. Their gun penetrates our armor from distances we cannot engage them. We face technical inferiority for the first time in this war. Guderian, architect of Germany's Panzer Doctrine and arguably the Wehrmacht's finest armor commander, reads Fischer's report with growing alarm. If the Red Army possesses tanks superior to German designs, and possesses them in quantity, the entire strategic calculus of Barbarossa collapses. July 1941, Berlin. An emergency meeting convenes at OKH, the German Army High Command. Guderian presents combat footage, shaky camera work showing German tanks firing at T-34s, while Soviet rounds punch through German armor like tissue paper. Hitler watches in silence, his face darkening. The Führer's entire military strategy rests on technological and tactical superiority, the assumption that German engineering excellence gives the Wehrmacht decisive advantages. The T-34 destroys that assumption. Hitler demands an immediate solution, not incremental improvements, but a revolutionary design that will restore German superiority. The tank that will become the Tiger is born not from ambition, but from panic. August 1941. 2 German companies receive emergency contracts to design what the Wehrmacht calls a breakthrough tank. Henschel and Son, a locomotive manufacturer converted to military production, takes a conservative approach. Proven transmission technology, incremental increases in armor thickness, a gun powerful enough to destroy any Soviet tank at long range. Ferdinand Porsche is the brilliant but eccentric designer, proposes something radical, an electric transmission system never before attempted in a tank this heavy promising superior mobility and reliability. The 2 designs will compete, with the winner entering immediate mass production. Henschel's engineering team, led by chief designer Erwin Aders, works 16-hour days through autumn 1941. The specifications they are working towards seem impossible. A tank weighing 50-plus tons, armored heavily enough to defeat Soviet anti-tank guns, mounting the legendary 88mm anti-aircraft gun adapted for tank use. That gun, already famous for destroying British tanks in North Africa, can penetrate any armor in existence. But mounting it requires a massive turret, which requires a massive hull, which requires a powerful engine and transmission. Every component pushes the boundaries of existing German manufacturing capability. November 1941. The first prototype Tiger rolls out of the Henschel plant in Kassel. Engineers immediately discover problems. The transmission, a modified truck gearbox scaled up for tank use, overheats during static testing. The engine, a Maybach HL2, 10 generating 700 horsepower, provides adequate power, but runs at the edge of its operational limits. The suspension, an intricate overlapping wheel design, intended to distribute the vehicle's enormous weight, proves maintenance-intensive and vulnerable to mud and debris. Aders and his team know the design isn't ready, but the Wehrmacht doesn't have time for perfection. December 1941. The Tank Commission, a joint military-industrial board responsible for armored vehicle procurement, examines both prototypes. Porsche's electric transmission design performs impressively in trials, but proves too complex for mass production and field maintenance. Henschel's design, despite its transmission problems, uses proven components that existing factories can manufacture and field mechanics can repair. The Commission makes its decision. Henschel's Tiger enters immediate production. Porsche's design is shelved, though its turret will later be adapted for the Jagd Panther tank destroyer, a callback that becomes significant in Germany's later desperate scramble for armored vehicles. The Tiger's specifications reflect the crisis that created it. Frontal armor 100 millimeters thick, equivalent to 2.5 times the protection of Germany's standard Panzer IV. The 88mm gun, capable of penetrating Soviet T-34 armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, while the T-34's gun struggles to penetrate the Tiger's armor even at close range. Combat weight, 56.9 tons, more than double the Panzer IV's 25 tons. It's not an incremental improvement, it's a paradigm shift. A weapon designed to restore Germany's technological edge through overwhelming superiority in armor and firepower. But the transmission remains a fundamental flaw, a ticking time bomb that will haunt every Tiger unit throughout the war. The Maybach gearbox was never designed for a 56-ton vehicle. Engineers know this, military planners know this. But the threat of the T-34, the nightmare of Soviet armor superiority, clouds judgment. Germany needs this tank operational immediately, even if it's not perfect. The crisis that built the Tiger also compromised it, embedding vulnerabilities that no amount of armor plate or firepower can overcome. The monster is born. Now it must learn to fight. February 1942, the Henschel plant in Kassel, Germany. The first production model Tiger I rolls off the assembly line after months of preparation, tooling adjustments, and worker training. Nazi propaganda cameras capture the moment. A mechanical leviathan emerging from the factory floor, its 88mm gun barrel extending like a promise of invincibility. The propaganda ministry announces ambitious production targets to military planners. 25 Tigers per month by mid-1942, and at 50 per month by early 1943. These numbers will turn the tide on the Eastern Front, restore German armor superiority, and intimidate the Allies into negotiation. The numbers are fantasy. May 1942. 3 months after that first Tiger rolled out, total production stands at 15 tanks. Not 15 per month, 15 total. The Henschel plant struggles with every aspect of Tiger manufacturing. Each tank requires 1,300 separate components, many demanding tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. The turret ring, the circular track allowing the turret to rotate, must fit precisely or the entire gun mechanism jams. Workers hand-fit components with files and calipers, a process that eats hours. General Friedrich Fromm, chief of Wehrmacht procurement, submits a classified report to Hitler, noting that transmission failures cause 80% of assembly delays. Each failed transmission must be disassembled, inspected, rebuilt, another week lost. The Maybach VV 12 engine proves equally problematic. 400 man-hours to build a single engine, with specialized machining required for the crankshaft, cylinder heads, and valve train. Germany's machine tool industry, already stretched thin supporting aircraft and U-boat production, can barely keep pace. The gearbox assembly involves 6,000 rivets, many driven by hand because pneumatic riveters don't provide sufficient precision. One misaligned rivet creates a stress point, where the entire transmission can fail under combat loads. Quality control inspectors reject 30% of gearboxes during initial testing. And those rejection rates improve as workers gain experience, but they never disappear entirely. August 1942. The Royal Air Force conducts a bombing raid on Kassel as part of Britain's strategic bombing campaign against German industry. The Henschel plant suffers moderate damage. 3 workshops destroyed, 1 assembly line damaged, critical machine tools ruined. Production halts completely for 6 weeks while repairs proceed and replacement equipment arrives. When the line restarts in October, the Wehrmacht has lost 150 potential Tigers, a deficit that will never be recovered. The bombing campaign, though not specifically targeting Tiger production, creates cascading delays throughout Germany's entire armored vehicle industry. November 1942, Albert Speer, made Hitler's newly appointed Minister of Armaments and War Production, assumes control of tank manufacturing with a mandate to increase output dramatically. Speer, a technocrat who understands industrial efficiency, immediately reorganizes production. He mandates 50 Tigers per month by spring 1943, implements standardized components across different tank models to reduce tooling costs, and threatens factory managers with removal if they fail to meet quotas. Speer's reorganization helps, but it cannot overcome fundamental constraints: limited factory space, scarce raw materials, and chronic skilled labor shortages. March 1943. Despite Speer's reforms, monthly Tiger production reaches just 14 tanks. Each Tiger requires 300,000 man-hours of labor, from initial raw materials to completed vehicle. For comparison, a Panzer IV requires approximately 100,000 man-hours. The Tiger's complexity, its hand-fitted components and tight tolerances, creates an exponential increase in manufacturing time. Workers need weeks of training before they can assemble Tiger components competently. The overlapping road wheel system alone, designed to distribute the tank's weight across wider tracks, involves 96 separate wheels per vehicle, each requiring individual mounting and alignment. The arithmetic of Tiger production reveals Germany's fundamental problem. From February 1942 through May 1945, the Henschel and its associated plants manufacture 1,376 Tiger I tanks total. Spread across 3 years of war, that's roughly 38 tanks per month averaged over the entire production run, far below even the most modest targets. Meanwhile, the United States produces 49,234 Sherman tanks during the same period. The Soviet Union builds approximately 58,000 T, 34 tanks of various models. Germany's most famous tank exists in numbers that barely register against Allied production capacity. The production bottleneck affects strategy at every level. Tiger units cannot replace combat losses quickly enough to maintain strength. Battalions that should field 45 tanks often operate with 20 or 30, sometimes fewer. Each destroyed Tiger represents an irreplaceable asset, a hole in the line that takes months to fill. Wehrmacht commanders start hoarding Tigers, refusing to commit them to action unless absolutely necessary because replacing losses is impossible. This caution undermines the very purpose of creating such a powerful weapon. A Tiger sitting in reserve, preserved against potential threats, contributes nothing to the battle happening now. Worker testimony, recovered from Allied interrogations after the war, reveals the human dimension of this manufacturing nightmare. Friedrich Baumann, a Henschel assembly line supervisor, describes working conditions in 1943. "We knew the transmission was flawed. Everyone knew. But orders came from Berlin. Produce more tanks, faster, don't slow down for repairs. We built them knowing they would fail in combat, knowing crews would die because we couldn't fix fundamental problems. What choice did we have? That moral compromise, building weapons the builders knew were compromised, haunted German factory workers even as they took pride in their craftsmanship. The crisis of Tiger production crystallizes a fundamental strategic error in Nazi Germany's war planning. Hitler and his inner circle believed technological superiority could compensate for numerical inferiority, that a small number of excellent weapons could defeat large numbers of adequate ones. The Tiger embodied this philosophy perfectly and exposed its fatal flaw. Without mass production, without the ability to replace losses and sustain operations, even the most sophisticated weapon becomes irrelevant. The monster is built. Nah, but there will never be enough monsters, and that scarcity, more than any Allied action, will doom the Tiger before it ever fires a shot in anger. August 29th, 1942. 6 Tiger, 1 tanks, the entire operational strength of Schwere Panzerabteilung 501, cross from Libya into Egypt. The convoy moves at night to avoid British reconnaissance aircraft, raising dust clouds that obscure the desert stars. Each Tiger weighs 56.9 tons, too heavy for many bridges, forcing the column to take circuitous routes along roads that can support their weight. Major Hummel, battalion commander, knows his orders. Proceed to the front lines near Ruisat Ridge, engage British armor, and demonstrate the Tiger's capabilities in combat. Berlin wants proof that their new weapon works. The crews are about to provide it. The afternoon sun hangs low when Feldwebel Holzhammer, commanding Tiger III, spots British tanks approximately 2,000 meters distant. His gunner, peering through the Zeiss optics, identifies them as Crusader tanks, British medium armor with 40mm frontal protection and a 2-pounder gun. Standard engagement protocol calls for closing to 1,000 meters before firing, where accuracy is assured. Holzhammer decides differently. He orders his gunner to fire at current range, testing whether the Tiger's 88mm gun can achieve what the manual promises. The gun barks. The shell flies. 2 seconds later, a British Crusader explodes, its turret spinning lazily through the air. Holzhammer's radio crackles with reports from other Tigers. The British armored column, though approximately 40 vehicles strong, has realized they're under attack and attempts to close the range where their guns might be effective. But the Tigers possess a critical advantage: gun stabilization superior to British designs, allowing them to fire accurately while moving. As the Crusaders charge forward, Tigers fire methodically, 1 shot every 8 seconds, each round finding its target. Within 15 minutes, 9 British tanks lie burning in the sand. The Crusaders return fire desperately, their shells striking Tiger armor and ricocheting harmlessly into the sky. Not one Tiger suffers damage beyond chipped paint. August 30th morning. British intelligence has reported the previous day's engagement to 2nd Armored Brigade headquarters. The brigade commander, not fully believing the reports, commits his entire strength to destroying what he assumes is a small German force that got lucky. 70 British tanks advance on the German position, where 4 Tigers have deployed in hull-down positions, showing only their turrets above the dune crests. The British attack with courage born of desperation, knowing their armor is outmatched but hoping numerical superiority will overwhelm the Germans. It doesn't. The engagement lasts 4 hours. British tanks attempt to flank the Tigers, to get close enough where their 2-pounders might penetrate side armor. But the Tigers reposition constantly, their commanders communicating by radio to cover each other's vulnerable angles. 1 Tiger, commanded by Oberfeldwebel Müller, destroys 12 British tanks during a single sustained action, firing until his barrel glows red and the loader's arms shake from exhaustion. British tankers, watching their comrades die in fires they cannot avenge, eventually retreat. The Tigers withdraw that evening, having suffered 1 mechanical breakdown, 2 vehicles with minor combat damage, and 0 total losses. The kill numbers from Ruisat spark controversy that persists into modern historical analysis. German records claim Tigers destroyed 45 British tanks during the 2-day engagement. British records acknowledge losses of approximately 15 tanks to all causes, including mechanical failure and artillery. The discrepancy reveals how battlefield chaos creates inflated claims. German crews counted knocked-out tanks multiple times as they repositioned, credited destroyed vehicles hit by artillery as tank kills, and included abandoned British tanks that suffered no combat damage. Modern historians estimate actual Tiger kills at 20 to 25 vehicles, still a devastating ratio against a force 10 times their number. September 1st, 1942. British Army intelligence circulates an urgent memorandum to all armor commanders in North Africa. Enemy has deployed new heavy tank designated Mark 6 or Tiger. Single vehicle observed holding position against entire British armored squadron. Current anti-tank weapons ineffective against frontal armor. Recommend extreme caution when engaging. Request immediate deployment of 17-pounder anti-tank guns. The 17-pounder, still in development, won't arrive in quantity until late 1943. British commanders realize they face a weapon they cannot defeat with current equipment. The psychological impact of Rubaiyat exceeds the tactical results. British tank crews begin refusing direct engagements with Tigers, waiting for air support or artillery instead. The mere presence of Tigers on a battlefield forces Allied commanders to commit disproportionate resources, airstrikes, massed artillery, coordinated attacks by multiple tank battalions to neutralize what might be only 3 or 4 enemy vehicles. This psychological multiplication effect, one Tiger tying down 50 Allied tanks through fear alone, becomes the weapon's most valuable attribute. German propaganda exploits this mercilessly, releasing footage of Tigers in action to demoralize Allied troops and boost German morale. But the technical reality behind Rubaiyat's success reveals vulnerabilities that British intelligence doesn't yet understand. The Tigers succeeded because they fought at long range, where their armor and gun advantages were absolute, against an enemy with no weapons capable of penetrating them. The Crusaders' 2-pounder gun, effective against Italian and early German armor, was obsolete against the Tigers' 100mm frontal plate. In essence, the Tigers faced an enemy that couldn't hurt them under any circumstances, a situation that wouldn't persist once the Allies developed better anti-tank weapons. The baptism by fire at Rubaiyat creates the Tiger's legend, the reputation for invincibility that will haunt Allied soldiers for years. That single engagement, 6 tanks defeating vastly superior numbers, all becomes the foundation of Tiger mythology. But mythology and reality are different things. The Tigers succeeded because everything aligned perfectly. Long engagement ranges, inferior enemy weapons, ideal terrain, and surprise. When any of those factors change, and they will change repeatedly throughout the war, the Tiger's limitations will become as obvious as its strengths. The legend is born. The legend is also incomplete, and that incompleteness will kill thousands of men before the war ends. January 1943. The German Army High Command issues a directive expanding Tiger production to 50 tanks per month, knowing that Henschel can barely build half that number. But the directive contains a more fundamental problem that nobody discusses openly. Germany has exhausted its pool of suitable tank crew candidates. The Wehrmacht's brutal campaigns in Russia have consumed entire age cohorts of young men. By early 1943, Germany conscripts teenagers and men approaching middle age, soldiers who lack the physical stamina and mental flexibility ideal for tank operations. The Tiger requires exceptional crews. Germany can barely provide adequate ones. The Tiger demands a 5-man crew with specialized skills distributed across distinct roles. The commander, typically holding the rank of Obergefreiter or Feldwebel, must simultaneously direct the tank's movement, identify targets, coordinate with other Tigers by radio, and make split-second tactical decisions while sitting in a vibrating steel box being shot at. The gunner operates the main gun and coaxial machine gun, all requiring both mechanical aptitude and the spatial reasoning to calculate range, lead, and shell drop for moving targets. The loader must manhandle 50-plus pound shells in cramped conditions, while the tank pitches across rough terrain. The driver navigates while controlling a transmission so finicky that shifting gears incorrectly can strip gears or snap drive shafts. The radio operator maintains communications equipment while operating the hull-mounted machine gun and assisting with navigation. March 1943. The Wehrmacht establishes accelerated Tiger crew training at Kummersdorf, outside Berlin, reducing instruction time from 6 months to 6 weeks. Instructors protest that 6 weeks barely covers basic operations, providing no time for the advanced tactics that make Tiger units effective. They're overruled. These are the Austere, Germany's Eastern Front Army Group, needs replacements immediately. Better to send inadequately trained crews than no crews at all. The accelerated program teaches men to drive, shoot, and maintain the Tiger at basic competency. It doesn't teach them how to survive when a T-34 gets inside their minimum engagement range, or when Soviet anti-tank guns open fire from ambush positions. May 1943. A panzer officer named Hauptmann Ernst Köhler writes a letter home that British intelligence intercepts 3 weeks later. Köhler describes his new replacement crew. The commander is 20 years old and has never seen combat. The gunner trained on a Panzer III and doesn't understand the Tiger's fire control system. The driver cannot operate the transmission smoothly. He grinds gears on every shift. I am sending them into action against the Russians next week. I wonder if I will see them again. Köhler's pessimism proves justified. His unit's casualty reports from June 1943 show that replacement crews suffer 50% higher losses than veteran crews during their first 30 days of combat. The Kursk offensive in July 1943 devastates Tiger personnel strength even more severely than it destroys the tanks themselves. 60 Tigers destroyed or abandoned represent 60 crews, 300 men, dead, wounded, or captured. Replacing the tanks takes months. Replacing the crews with equivalent experience takes years, which Germany doesn't have. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht implements emergency measures, cannibalizing damaged Tigers for spare parts rather than repairing them, because crews aren't available to operate repaired vehicles, merging understrength battalions to maintain at least some units at combat effectiveness, and promoting surviving experienced crew members to leadership positions regardless of formal rank. November 1943. Something unprecedented happens. The Wehrmacht increases tank mechanic pay by 25%. The first time in the war, that wage incentives are used to attract personnel to a specific military specialty. The pay increase reveals desperation. Tigers require specialized mechanical knowledge that typical mechanics don't possess. The transmission alone, with its 47 individual clutch components and precise adjustment requirements, demands understanding of metallurgy and engineering principles. Mechanics without this knowledge strip transmissions attempting repairs, rendering Tigers irreparable without factory-level intervention. Germany faces a crisis where Tiger availability is limited not by production or combat losses, but by the absence of qualified mechanics to maintain existing vehicles. The training deficit creates tactical consequences that rarely appear in official records. Inexperienced crews make predictable mistakes, firing too quickly and missing shots that waste irreplaceable ammunition. Positioning Tigers in exposed locations where anti-tank guns can exploit their weaker side armor, failing to maintain radio discipline so Soviet forces intercept their communications, and panicking under fire instead of following doctrinal responses. A veteran Tiger commander can exploit the tank's strengths while minimizing its vulnerabilities. An inexperienced commander turns a 56-ton armored killing machine into a slow-moving target. Wehrmacht personnel, records analyzed after the war, reveal the severity of Germany's crew shortage. Tiger 1 optimal crew training timeline. 6 months of progressive instruction covering basic operations, advanced tactics, and combined arms integration. Actual average training time by mid-1944, 12 weeks. Soviet T-34 crew. Training by comparison, 8 weeks. But Soviet doctrine emphasized numerical superiority and accepted higher crew casualties as the cost of maintaining offensive pressure. Germany couldn't afford similar casualty rates. Each dead Tiger crew represented training investments and experience that took months or years to develop. Former Tiger crew members, interviewed decades after the war, described the psychological burden of operating complex machinery without adequate preparation. Unteroffizier Hans Weber, a loader with Schwerpanzerabteilung 503, recalls his first combat action in March 1944. I had fired exactly 12 practice rounds during training. In my first engagement, I loaded 43 rounds in 2 hours. My hands bled from shell casing burns. I didn't know that you're supposed to wear asbestos gloves. And nobody taught us that, because nobody had time to teach us anything except how to load and fire. The personnel crisis reaches its logical conclusion in early 1945, when Germany has more operational Tigers than trained crews to man them. Several units report Tigers sitting in the depot yards, mechanically sound, with full ammunition and fuel, but idle because no qualified operators exist. This represents the ultimate failure of Nazi Germany's strategic planning. Building sophisticated weapons without building the human infrastructure to employ them effectively. The Tiger isn't defeated by Allied technology or tactics in any single decisive battle. It's defeated by arithmetic. Germany cannot recruit, train, and retain the specialized personnel required to operate Tigers at the scale necessary to change the war's outcome. The machines are magnificent. The system that employs them is fundamentally broken. And broken systems, no matter how excellent their components, inevitably collapse. February 1943. Eastern Front, somewhere near Kursk. A Tiger II tank, a different model from the Tiger one, but sharing the same fundamental transmission design, experiences complete drivetrain failure during a routine patrol. The driver, Gefreiter Klaus Hartmann, feels the gears seize mid-shift. Here's the sickening crack of metal fracturing under load. The Tiger coasts to a stop, immobile, exactly 100 meters from friendly lines. The crew abandons the vehicle and runs. Soviet anti-tank gunners, watching from concealed positions 800 meters distant, wait patiently for recovery vehicles to attempt retrieval. When recovery crews arrive 3 hours later, Soviet guns open fire. The Tiger is destroyed not by enemy action against a moving target, but because mechanical failure left it helpless. The Tiger's transmission was doomed from conception. Henschel engineers adapted the Maybach transmission, originally designed for trucks and light tanks carrying approximately 45 tons, for a vehicle weighing 56.9 tons. Basic physics made failure inevitable. Transmissions work by transferring engine power through gears that mesh under enormous pressure. When the vehicle weight exceeds design specifications, gear teeth experience stress they weren't engineered to withstand. Metal fatigues. Components crack. Transmissions fail. Yes, Henschel engineers understood this perfectly in 1941 when they presented the prototype to the Tank Commission. They were overruled by military necessity. May 1943. In preparation for Operation Citadel, the massive German offensive at Kursk, Wehrmacht maintenance reports catalog Tiger availability. A typical Panzer Army report reads, Tiger Battalion nominal strength, 45 vehicles. Combat ready, 27. In maintenance for transmission overhaul, 11. Awaiting spare parts, 7. 40% of Tiger strength unavailable due to drivetrain problems. Each transmission overhaul requires 60 hours of intensive labor by skilled mechanics. Remove the turret. Extract the transmission. Disassemble it into hundreds of components. Inspect each piece for stress fractures. Replace damaged parts if available. Improvise repairs if not. Reassemble everything. Reinstall. Test. The process consumes resources Germany cannot afford: time, skilled labor, spare parts. Dust proves as deadly as Soviet shells. The Tiger's engine cooling system draws air through filters designed for European conditions: rain, mud, temperate temperatures. On the Russian steppe during summer, vehicles advance through clouds of fine dust that overwhelms filtration systems. Dust infiltrates the transmission, mixing with lubricating oil to create an abrasive paste that grinds gear teeth like sandpaper. During the opening phases of Kursk in July 1943, Tiger Battalion commanders report that within 48 hours of initial attacks, 6 of 12 Tigers in a typical company suffered transmission damage from dust ingestion. The remaining Tigers are held in reserve to preserve fighting strength, undermining the entire purpose of committing them to battle. Italian terrain creates different nightmares. September 1943. Schwere Panzerabteilung 504 transfers to Italy following the Italian armistice, tasked with holding defensive lines against advancing Allied forces. Italian mountains and rough roads impose mechanical stress that flat terrain never creates. Transmissions must work constantly, shifting gears as Tigers navigate steep grades and hairpin turns. Within 6 weeks, 3 Tigers suffer irreparable transmission damage and must be abandoned when recovery is impossible through mountain passes. The crews, trained at enormous expense, walk back to German lines carrying only their personal weapons. The Maybach transmission cooling system represents another fundamental design flaw. Engine power runs the cooling fan. When the Tiger idles, common during defensive operations, when tanks wait in ambush positions, the engine runs at low RPM, providing insufficient cooling. Oil temperatures climb toward 95 degrees Celsius, approaching the point where lubricants break down and metal-on-metal contact begins. Experienced commanders know this. They periodically rev engines even while stationary, maintaining cooling fan speed. Inexperienced commanders don't. Their transmissions overheat, seize, and fail at moments when reliability matters most. December 1943. Henschel engineers deliver an improved transmission, the Maybach Olvar, designed to address the original shortcomings. The Olvar features stronger gears, improved cooling, and better durability under sustained load. It's exactly what the Tiger needed 3 years earlier. By late 1943, Germany lacks the industrial capacity to retrofit existing Tigers on any meaningful scale. 15 vehicles received the Olvar conversion by war's end. Conversion time, 80 hours per vehicle. The remaining 1,361 production Tigers keep their flawed transmissions until they're destroyed, abandoned, or captured. Wehrmacht technical reports, declassified after the war, reveal the statistical reality. Average Tiger, 1 transmission reliability, 1 failure per 500 kilometers of operation. Panzer IV, comparison, 1 failure per 1,500 kilometers. Soviet T-34, 1 failure per 2,000 kilometers. The Tiger's most devastating disadvantage isn't immediately obvious in single engagements, where its armor and firepower shine. It emerges over weeks and months of sustained operations, where mechanical unreliability removes vehicles from combat availability as effectively as enemy fire. A battalion of 45 Tigers might maintain only 30 vehicles combat-ready at any given time, not from battle damage, but from chronic mechanical problems. Field maintenance officers develop bitter expertise in Tiger quirks. Hauptmann Dieter Schultz, maintenance officer for Schwere Panzerabteilung 502, writes in his journal, "The transmission is our true enemy. The Russians shoot at us. The transmission betrays us. We can sometimes avoid Russian fire. We cannot avoid transmission failure. It comes for every Tiger eventually, and like death itself." Schultz's unit records show that across 12 months of Eastern Front operations in 1944, his battalion suffers 27 Tiger total losses. 17 are destroyed in combat. 10 are abandoned due to irreparable mechanical failure, primarily transmission-related. The crisis of Tiger reliability forces tactical adaptations that undermine the vehicle's intended purpose. Tigers were designed for offensive operations, rapid breakthroughs, exploiting superior armor and firepower. Chronic transmission problems make sustained offensive operations impossible. Battalions advance 50 kilometers, stop for maintenance, advance again, stop again. Soviet forces learn to let Tigers advance, allow mechanical failures to thin their numbers, then counterattack against diminished German strength. The Tiger becomes a defensive weapon not by choice, but by necessity, because defensive positions minimize transmission strain. The transmission war is silent, invisible, and ultimately decisive. Every Tiger lost to mechanical failure is a Tiger that killed no enemy tanks, supported no infantry, achieved no objectives, Every hour spent on transmission maintenance is an hour that tank wasn't fighting. Every mechanic jury-rigging a broken transmission is a mechanic unavailable for more productive work. The transmission problem represents everything wrong with the Tiger's design philosophy. Sophisticated components operating beyond their design limits, creating a weapon that fails not from enemy action, but from its own internal contradictions. The Tiger doesn't lose the war, but the transmission helps lose the war. Yes, and nobody outside Wehrmacht maintenance units fully understands this until decades later, when historians examine the quiet, mechanical causes of Germany's defeat. July 4th, 1943, 0400 hours. The German Ninth Army, commanded by Field Marshal Walter Model, launches Operation Citadel against the northern face of the Kursk salient. 200 tanks, including 56 Tiger, is, representing the highest concentration ever deployed in a single offensive, rumble towards Soviet defensive lines through pre-dawn darkness. Model's plan assumes that massed Tigers, leading panzer divisions in coordinated assault, will smash through Soviet defenses within 48 hours. Then, mobile forces will race into the salient's interior, encircle Soviet armies, and achieve the decisive victory that Germany desperately needs. Berlin has invested everything in this offensive. 3 months of preparation, scarce fuel reserves, the cream of Wehrmacht armored forces. The Tigers will prove whether German technological superiority can overcome Soviet numerical advantages. July 4th through 5th. The Tigers encounter Soviet defensive doctrine that turns German advantages into liabilities. Soviet engineers have created defense in depth, multiple layers of anti-tank guns, infantry positions, minefields, and pre-registered artillery zones extending 40 kilometers behind the front lines. Soviet commanders understand they cannot defeat Tigers in direct armor versus armor combat at long range, so they don't try. Instead, they use 45mm, 57mm, and 76mm anti-tank guns in ambush positions, targeting Tigers from flanks and rear where armor is thinner. Soviet doctrine accepts that anti-tank gun crews will die stopping German armor. They're trading guns for time, sacrificing gun crews to slow the German advance until Soviet reserves can counterattack. July 6th, 10:30 hours. The first Tiger falls. Soviet anti-tank teams, 5 guns coordinating fire, hit a single Tiger simultaneously from 3 angles. 1 round penetrates side armor, killing the loader and driver. 2 more rounds damage tracks and transmission. The Tiger crew bails out, abandoning their vehicle as Soviet infantry advance. The psychological impact ripples through German commanders. Tigers aren't invulnerable. Coordinated Soviet fire can destroy them. The legend cracks slightly, letting doubt seep through. July 7th, 4th Panzer Army, attacking the southern face of Kursk, deploys 90 Tiger IS against restructured Soviet defenses. For the first time, Tigers encounter upgraded Soviet armor, T-3485s with improved guns and thicker armor. The T-3485's 85mm gun can penetrate Tiger side armor at 600 meters. Not reliably, but possibly. Suddenly, the engagement isn't a massacre. It's a contest between roughly equivalent weapons. Tigers retain advantages in frontal armor and gun optics, but the gap has narrowed. German commanders realize that Soviet tank development is catching up faster than German engineering can maintain superiority. Soviet defensive tactics evolve hour by hour. German intelligence intercepts Soviet radio communications describing new orders. Let Tigers advance, target support vehicles, isolate Tigers from infantry and supply trucks. The Soviets understand that Tigers alone cannot win battles. They require infantry support to protect against close-range attacks, fuel trucks to maintain mobility, and ammunition carriers to sustain fire. By destroying these support elements, Soviet forces turn Tigers into immobilized, resource-starved, defensive positions. Several Tigers run out of fuel during the battle's first week, forcing crews to abandon perfectly functional vehicles, because supply trucks cannot reach them through Soviet artillery fire. July 12th, the Battle of Prokhorovka, examined in detail later, represents Kursk's climactic moment. Approximately 90 Tigers, and is supported by 200 Panzer IVs and 50 tank destroyers, foresees Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, with approximately 800 T-34s and 150 lighter tanks. The engagement devolves into chaos across the open steppe, tanks maneuvering at point-blank range, smoke obscuring vision, coordinated tactics disintegrating into individual survival. Both sides claim overwhelming victory. German records report 200 Soviet tanks destroyed. Soviet records acknowledge 150 to 180 tank losses, but claim significant German casualties, especially among Tigers. Modern analysis suggests both sides inflated enemy losses while minimizing their own. The cumulative losses from Kursk reveal strategic disaster behind tactical successes. Germany commits 211 Tiger IS to the offensive, and at roughly 15% of total Tiger strength worldwide. By July 20th, when Hitler orders Citadel terminated, approximately 60 Tigers are total losses, destroyed, captured, or abandoned. Another 40 require major repairs. German tank crews achieve impressive kill ratios, possibly destroying 3 or 4 Soviet tanks for every Tiger lost. But the Soviets replace losses within weeks from vast production capacity. Germany cannot replace 60 Tigers in months. The Kursk offensive fails because everything learned from previous chapters converges into systematic disaster. Insufficient numbers. 211 Tigers face 5,200 Soviet tanks. A ratio of 1 to 25 that no amount of technological superiority can overcome. It's inadequate crew training. Replacement crews perform poorly compared to veterans lost in earlier campaigns. Transmission failures, dust, heat, and sustained operations destroy transmissions at rates exceeding battlefield losses. Personnel shortages. Dead and wounded crews cannot be replaced with equally experienced soldiers. Each individual problem is manageable. Combined, they're catastrophic. Soviet commanders draw different lessons from Kursk than their German counterparts. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, coordinating Soviet defense, concludes that accepting short-term losses to inflict irreplaceable German casualties is strategically sound. The Red Army can afford losing 500 tanks if doing so eliminates 50 irreplaceable Tigers and exhausts German offensive capacity. German commanders, analyzing Kursk from perspectives shaped by European military tradition, emphasizing preservation of elite forces, see only tactical achievements, excellent kill ratios, demonstrations of Tiger superiority, initial penetrations of Soviet lines. They miss the strategic reality that Soviet reserves are limitless, while German reserves don't exist. August 1st, 1943. Wehrmacht analysis of Kursk reaches Hitler's desk. The report attempts to frame the offensive as a tactical success interrupted by strategic necessity. The Allied invasion of Sicily required redeploying forces westward, preventing Citadel's continuation to victorious conclusion. This narrative allows German leadership to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. That Germany cannot win attrition wars against enemies with greater population and industrial capacity. That technological superiority provides tactical advantages but not strategic victory. And that the Tiger tank, magnificent in isolation, cannot alter fundamental mathematical realities. Kursk is the Tiger's ultimate test. The Tiger fails. And with that failure, Germany's last realistic hope of military victory on the Eastern Front dies, though the war continues for another 21 months of increasingly desperate fighting. July 12, 1943, 0830 hours. Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, approximately 800 to 34 tanks, in several separate formations, prepares to counterattack German 4th Panzer Army near the village of Prokhorovka. Soviet commanders have received orders from Stalin himself. Stop the German advance at all costs. Destroy the fascist tank forces. The motherland depends on your courage. German forces, including 90 Tigers supported by 200 medium tanks and 50 assault guns, occupied defensive positions along a low ridge. What happens next becomes the war's most mythologized tank battle, celebrated in Soviet propaganda, analyzed in Western military histories, and fundamentally misunderstood by everyone for decades. The battle begins with Soviet tanks advancing in waves across open steppe, a tactic that Western observers later describe as a coordinated massed attack designed to overwhelm German defenses through sheer numbers. Soviet archival documents, declassified in the 1990s, revealed different reality. Fifth Guards. Tank Army's attack was poorly coordinated, with separate tank brigades advancing at different times without unified command. In some units attacked at 0900 hours, others not until afternoon. Several brigades lost radio contact with headquarters and operated independently. The Soviet human wave tactic, so celebrated in propaganda, was actually organizational chaos resulting from communication failures. German Tigers, positioned hull down with overlapping fields of fire, begin engaging Soviet tanks at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The engagement descends into confusion immediately. Smoke from burning vehicles obscures vision. Soviet tanks close the range aggressively, trying to penetrate areas where Tiger armor is vulnerable. Some T-34s get within 300 meters before being destroyed. Tigers fire until gun barrels overheat and ammunition runs low. Both sides fight with desperate intensity, an understanding that Prokhorovka represents a hinge point. German breakthrough or Soviet containment, strategic initiative or grinding stalemate. By 1600 hours, the battlefield resembles an industrial slaughterhouse. Burned-out tanks litter the steppe. Wounded men crawl toward aid stations. Ammunition exhaustion forces temporary ceasefires as both sides consolidate positions. German commanders report to 4th Panzer Army headquarters claiming overwhelming victory. 200 Soviet tanks destroyed. German losses minimal. Soviet commanders report to Stalin claiming decisive defensive victory. German advance stopped. Fascist forces battered and demoralized. Both sides believe their own reports. Both sides are lying, sometimes intentionally, sometimes through honest inability to count losses accurately amid chaos. Near September 1951. The Soviet propaganda ministry produces a documentary called The Battle of Prokhorovka, celebrating the engagement as the greatest tank battle in history, the moment when Soviet armor crushed German technological superiority through superior courage and tactical skill. The documentary includes dramatic reenactments, mass Soviet tanks charging gloriously, Tigers exploding under Soviet fire, German prisoners marching dejectedly into captivity. The film establishes Prokhorovka in Soviet popular consciousness as a legendary victory, taught in schools, commemorated with monuments, embedded in national mythology. Western military historians, lacking access to Soviet archives during the Cold War, accept Soviet casualty claims skeptically, but generally agree that Prokhorovka represented significant German losses. Post-war German sources, similarly unreliable, claim minimal Tiger losses while acknowledging tactical withdrawal. The historical consensus through the 1980s holds that Prokhorovka was the decisive tank battle that broke German offensive capacity at Kursk. This consensus is wrong. 1998. Russian military historian Alexander Solonin publishes analysis using declassified Soviet records from post-Cold War archival openings. Solonin's research reveals dramatically different casualty figures than the Soviet propaganda claimed. Soviet losses at Prokhorovka: approximately 340 tanks total, with 150 to 180 complete write-offs requiring factory rebuilding. German losses: 18 tanks destroyed, approximately 30 damaged and later repaired. At the famous greatest tank battle in history, was actually a tactical German victory that Soviet forces turned into strategic success by preventing breakthrough despite heavy losses. The casualty disparity reveals both German tactical advantages and Soviet strategic insight. Tigers, fighting from prepared positions at ideal ranges, inflicted devastating losses on Soviet armor, attacking across open ground. But Soviet commanders understood something German commanders didn't. Losing 300 tanks at Prokhorovka was acceptable if doing so stopped German offensive operations and forced Wehrmacht into defensive posture. Soviet factories could replace losses within weeks. Germany could not replace 18 destroyed Tigers within months. Trading Soviet numerical superiority for irreplaceable German assets represented sound strategy, even if tactics resulted in horrific casualties. Prokhorovka mythology serves purposes for all participants. Soviet propaganda needed triumphant victory narratives to maintain morale during brutal war. German sources emphasized tactical achievements to obscure strategic failure. Western historians, fascinated by dramatic tank versus tank combat, wanted to believe in massive decisive battles that determined war outcomes. The myth satisfied everyone's needs better than messy truth, that Prokhorovka was confused, casualties were lower than claimed, and its significance lay not in decisive victory, but in operational exhaustion that ended German offensive capability. The myth's deconstruction raises uncomfortable questions about Tiger tank legend generally. How much of the Tiger's fearsome reputation rests on inflated kill claims, exaggerated engagement reports, and propaganda from all sides? If Prokhorovka, supposedly the Tiger's finest hour, turns out to be far more ambiguous than believed, what does that suggest about other celebrated engagements? The Battle of Villers-Bocage, where Michael Wittmann reportedly destroyed 25 Allied vehicles in 15 minutes. The defensive actions on the Eastern Front, where single Tigers supposedly held off entire Soviet tank brigades. How much is factual achievement? And how much is mythology serving psychological warfare purposes? The myth that never happened teaches more profound lessons than accurate history might have. It demonstrates that war narratives are constructed by participants with agendas, that propaganda shapes memory as powerfully as lived experience, and that historical truth emerges slowly, if at all, from chaos, confusion, and deliberate distortion. The Tiger tank's legend was born at Prokhorovka and similar battles, but the legend is incomplete, exaggerated, and misleading. And recognizing that requires confronting the uncomfortable reality that much of what we know about military history is mythology wrapped around fragments of truth. August 1943. After Kursk's failure, German Army High Command issues Directive Number 436/43 restricting offensive Tiger employment. The document's language is bureaucratically bland, obscuring revolutionary tactical implications. Heavy tank battalions will henceforth be allocated primarily to defensive operations, utilized as mobile strong points supporting infantry positions and anti-tank screens. Tigers, conceived as breakthrough weapons for offensive warfare, are officially transformed into defensive assets. The shift acknowledges reality that German commanders cannot speak aloud. Germany has lost the strategic initiative and will never regain it. November 1943. Eastern Front near Smolensk. Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer commands 3 Tigers dug into fortified positions overlooking a river crossing. Soviet intelligence has identified Bauer's position and commits an entire tank brigade, 60 T-34s, to eliminating the German strongpoint. The attack begins at dawn. Soviet tanks advance across open ground, firing on the move, attempting to overwhelm German defenses through speed and numbers. Bauer's Tigers wait motionless, guns aligned with pre-calculated firing lanes. At 1,200 meters, the Tigers open fire with methodical precision. The engagement lasts 6 hours across 3 separate Soviet attacks. Each attack follows similar pattern. T-34s advance. Tigers fire from concealment. Soviet tanks burn and withdraw to regroup. By evening, Soviet commanders abandoned the assault. German reports claim 180 tank kills. Soviet records acknowledge 43 tanks destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The truth likely sits between those figures. But the strategic lesson is clear. Dug-in Tigers, fighting from prepared positions at ideal ranges, become nearly invulnerable defensive weapons that can repel forces 10 times their number. June 6, 1944. While Allied forces storm Normandy beaches, Michael Wittmann commands a Tiger I from Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101 near the French town of Villers-Bocage. Wittmann encounters a British armored column advancing through narrow streets, tanks compressed into a confined space where their mobility advantage disappears. What happens next becomes arguably the most famous single Tiger engagement of the war. Wittmann's after-action report claims 25 British vehicles destroyed in 15 minutes, tanks, half-tracks, and reconnaissance cars caught in devastating ambush. British records acknowledge 9 confirmed losses, possibly 12, mostly to single Tiger, firing from concealed position. The Villers-Bocage engagement demonstrates how drastically Tiger tactical employment has evolved from Kursk. No longer used for massed assault, Wittmann's Tiger operates independently, exploiting urban terrain that neutralizes British numerical superiority. The ambush succeeds because Wittmann fights from surprise and positioning rather than frontal assault. Nazi propaganda seizes on Villers-Bocage immediately, portraying Wittmann as invincible hero whose courage and skill epitomize German military excellence. Wittmann receives the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. His fame spreads through Wehrmacht ranks, providing morale boost as Germany's strategic position deteriorates. July 1944, Netherlands. Dutch civilians watch Tiger I tanks position themselves in fortified earthworks near Arnhem, preparing to defend against British paratroop landings during Operation Market Garden. These Tigers never move from their positions during the subsequent battle. They function as immobile artillery bunkers, while firing on British positions from fixed locations, their armor rendering them immune to most Allied weapons. The Tiger's crews, aware that fuel shortages prevent mobile operations, adapt to static defense. One Tiger near Arnhem fires over 400 rounds across 3 days without relocating once. Wehrmacht tactical doctrine evolves to formalize what commanders discover through necessity. Heavy tank battalions receive specific defensive instructions. Dig Tigers into earth revetments showing only turrets. Establish overlapping fields of fire between multiple vehicles. Pre-calculate ranges to likely approach routes. Camouflage positions against air reconnaissance, and maintain infantry security perimeters to prevent close-range anti-tank attacks. Creating proper Tiger defensive position requires 40 hours of engineering labor, excavating earth, constructing revetments, camouflaging metal with vegetation. But once established, these positions prove extraordinarily difficult for Allied forces to eliminate. The statistical advantages of defensive Tiger employment become apparent in after-action reports. Offensive casualty ratio, the exchange rate of Tigers lost versus enemy vehicles destroyed, averages approximately 1 to 3. 1 Tiger lost for every 3 enemy vehicles destroyed. Defensive casualty ratio improves dramatically to 1 to 7 or better. 1 Tiger lost for every 7 or more enemy vehicles destroyed. The improvement reflects how defensive positions mitigate Tigers' vulnerabilities while maximizing their strengths. The dug-in Tigers minimize exposure to flanking attacks that target weaker side armor. Prepared positions allow Tigers to engage at maximum range where their gun and armor advantages dominate. Static defense eliminates transmission reliability concerns that plague mobile operations. March 1945, Eastern Front. Soviet forces assault German defensive line near Kukstrin, encountering Tiger Battalion deployed in fortified positions. Soviet commanders have learned painful lessons about attacking dug-in Tigers. They commit overwhelming force, artillery bombardment for 3 hours, followed by infantry assault supported by flamethrower tanks to suppress German infantry, then massed armor attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The Soviets lose 40 tanks, destroying 8 Tigers. The exchange ratio favors the Germans tactically. Not strategically, it represents Soviet victory. They can afford 40 tank losses to eliminate 8 Tigers and capture the position. Germany cannot afford to lose 8 Tigers regardless of enemy casualties inflicted. The transformation from offensive to defensive doctrine represents Germany's unspoken admission of defeat. Offensive operations require mobility, logistical support, reserves to exploit breakthroughs, and strategic confidence that tactical successes can achieve meaningful objectives. Germany lacks all of these by late 1944. Defensive operations require only the will to resist and weapons that can destroy attacking forces. Tigers excel at this reduced mission. They become symbols of Germany's strategic collapse, even while demonstrating tactical competence. Magnificent weapons used for fighting retreats and delaying actions rather than decisive victories. Former Tiger commanders, interviewed decades later, express ambivalence about defensive employment. Obersturmbannführer Kurt Meyer describes his feelings in March 1945. "We knew the war was lost. Every soldier knew. But we had these magnificent machines, these Tigers that could kill T-34s at ranges they couldn't even see us. So we fought, not for victory, that was impossible, but to prove German technical excellence, to demonstrate that we could kill 10 of them for every one of us. It was pointless, but it was what we had left. The Tigers turn into bunkers. The bunkers turn into monuments. If the monuments commemorate nothing except the futility of fighting wars already lost." September 1943. United States Army Ordnance Department receives comprehensive Tiger. 1 intelligence reports compiled from British sources, captured German documents, and American tank crews' combat experiences in North Africa and Sicily. The reports make uncomfortable reading for American armored doctrine advocates. The M4 Sherman tank, America's primary medium tank deployed in vast numbers, cannot reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armor at any practical combat range. The Sherman's 75mm gun, adequate against earlier German panzers, bounces off Tiger armor even at point-blank distances. Meanwhile, Tiger 88mm guns destroy Shermans at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Nay, the math is brutal. American tanks face enemy they cannot hurt while being killed. From distances they cannot effectively engage. American military planners face a choice: redesign the Sherman with heavier armor and bigger guns, or develop specialized tank destroyers purpose-built to kill Tigers. Redesigning the Sherman would take 18 months minimum, disrupting production that's already generating 1,500 tanks monthly. Tank destroyers can enter service faster using existing chassis and adapted naval guns. October 1943, the decision is made. Rush the M36 Jackson tank destroyer into production. The Jackson mounts a 90mm high-velocity gun, capable of penetrating Tiger frontal armor at 800 meters. Oil production accelerates to 2,324 units over the next 18 months. June 6, 1944. Normandy invasion begins. Among the first American armored units ashore are tank destroyer battalions equipped with M36 Jacksons. Their first encounter with Tigers occurs near the town of St. Lo in late June. An American tank destroyer company, positioned in concealment along a hedgerow, engages Tiger 1 at 1,200 meters. The Jackson's 90mm gun penetrates Tiger side armor. The Tiger explodes, turret lifting briefly before crashing back onto the hull. American crews, accustomed to helplessness against Tigers, react with near disbelief. They finally possess weapons that can kill the monsters. Tactical doctrine evolves rapidly. Yet American commanders develop combined arms tactics, exploiting complementary strengths of Shermans and Jacksons. Shermans, faster and more maneuverable, serve as bait to draw Tiger fire and reveal German positions. Jacksons, slower but mounting heavier guns, Engage Tigers from flanking positions or long range once targets are identified. The tactic accepts Sherman casualties as necessary costs for locating Tigers so Jacksons can destroy them. Tank destroyer crews learn to operate in small teams, using speed and concealment rather than armor for protection, avoiding direct frontal engagements where Tiger advantages dominate. August 1944. Falaise Pocket. 25 German Tigers. Become trapped along with thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers when Allied forces close the encirclement around retreating German forces. German high command orders Tiger crews to destroy their vehicles rather than risk capture, but escape routes narrow as Allied armor tightens the noose. The Tigers fight desperate defensive action against overwhelming numbers. Approximately 500 Allied tanks and tank destroyers, supported by aircraft and artillery. The Tigers achieve remarkable kill ratios. Estimates suggest 50 or more Allied vehicles destroyed, but arithmetic eventually overwhelms tactical excellence. 6 Tigers escape encirclement. 19 are destroyed or abandoned. Soviet forces develop parallel solutions to the Tiger problem, though Allied-Soviet coordination is minimal during the war. Soviet Union rushes the IS-2 heavy tank into production in 1944. The IS-2 mounts 122mm gun, originally designed for field artillery, adapted for anti-tank use. The massive weapon can penetrate Tiger frontal armor at 1,000 meters and represents Soviet answer to German heavy armor. IS-2 armor at 120mm frontal thickness roughly matches Tiger protection. For the first time, Soviet forces possess tanks that can meet Tigers on equal terms. April 1945, final weeks of war. Rhine River crossings bring American and Soviet forces into same combat zones. Occasionally, they encounter each other. American tank destroyers observe Soviet IS-2s engaging final German Tiger units near Berlin. The IS-2's devastating 122mm gun destroys Tigers with single shots. The sheer kinetic energy of shells weighing 25 kilograms punching through armor that defeated smaller weapons. Soviet tank design philosophy, accepting crude mechanical reliability in exchange for overwhelming firepower, proves effective against Germany's sophisticated but scarce heavy tanks. Allied tank destroyer development represents adaptation at war's operational tempo. Identify threat, design countermeasure, produce countermeasure at scale, deploy and refine tactics, all within 12 to 18 months. German military-industrial complex cannot match this pace. By the time Tigers appear in significant numbers in 1943, Allied responses are already entering production. By the time those responses deploy in mid-1944, Tigers face enemies they cannot dominate through technological superiority alone. The temporary advantage Tigers provided during 1942 to 1943 evaporates as Allied engineering catches up. American military reports from European theater, compiled in winter 1944 to 45, note significant shift in tank crew morale. Early reports from Normandy describe American tankers dreading Tiger encounters, understanding their Shermans cannot compete. Later reports from autumn onward show confidence. Crews know that M-36 tank destroyers can kill Tigers, that superior Allied numbers eventually overwhelm German quality, and that air superiority prevents Tigers from operating effectively even when present. The psychological advantage Tigers once held dissipates. German technological superiority, real in 1942, becomes irrelevant by 1945 as Allies deploy adequate counterweapons in overwhelming quantity. The Allied response to Tigers teaches fundamental military lesson about technological competition during sustained conflict. Innovative weapons provide temporary advantages that eventually disappear as opponents adapt. Tigers dominated battlefields for approximately 18 months, from mid-1942 through mid-1944. After that period, Allied countermeasures neutralized German advantages. Germany's failure to maintain technological lead through continuous innovation, combined with inability to produce Tigers in sufficient numbers, meant that temporary superiority could not translate into strategic victory. The hunters become the hunted. When the Tigers face predators they cannot defeat, and the revolution in armored warfare continues, leaving German designs that seemed invincible in 1942 looking vulnerable and obsolete by 1945. March 1942, barely 2 months after the Tiger Won's design was finalized, Henschel receives a new contract from Wehrmacht procurement. Develop a Super Tiger with armor and firepower exceeding the Tiger Haschel by 50%. The specifications seem fantastical, even for engineers accustomed to ambitious projects. Front armor, 150 millimeters, 50% thicker than Tiger I. Main gun, long-barreled 88 millimeter with higher muzzle velocity, capable of penetrating any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The vehicle that emerges from this specification will be designated Tiger II, known to Allied intelligence as King Tiger or Royal Tiger. It will represent both the apex of German tank design and the bankruptcy of Germany's strategic thinking. June 1943. First Tiger. 2 prototype rolls out of Henschel's design facility. The vehicle weighs 68.5 tons, 52% heavier than Tiger I, creating immediate problems. The Maybach engine, barely adequate for Tiger I, struggles under Tiger II's weight. The transmission, that persistent nightmare that plagued Tiger I development, proves only marginally adequate despite engineering improvements. During initial testing, transmissions overheat regularly. Gun stabilization, critical for firing while moving, proves unreliable due to turret weight and complexity. And if engineers recognize the vehicle needs another year of development, Wehrmacht procurement orders immediate production anyway. September 1943. Tiger II enters limited production at Henschel's Kassel plant. Monthly output, 8 tanks. The production rate reveals Germany's fundamental constraint: manufacturing capacity that cannot support sophisticated designs at scale necessary for strategic impact. Each Tiger II requires even more specialized labor than Tiger I. Hand-fitted armor plates demand precision welding. Complex suspension systems need expert assembly. The overlapping wheel design, carried over from Tiger I, remains maintenance-intensive. Factory capacity allows only the most glacial production increase. January 1944. Tiger II, deployment repeatedly delayed due to mechanical problems discovered during testing. Transmission overheating persists despite redesigned cooling systems. Final drive failures occur regularly, forcing extended maintenance cycles. Gun optics, supposedly superior to any Allied equivalent, frequently lose calibration from firing shock. Wehrmacht ordnance inspectors reject 20% of completed vehicles during final acceptance testing. The rejected Tigers sit in factory yards awaiting repairs, while Soviet and Allied forces advance from east and west. February 1944 represents a moment of dark comedy in German procurement statistics. Total Tiger, 2 production to date, 5 vehicles. Soviet IS, 2 production during the same period, approximately 250 units. The Soviet Union, supposedly technologically inferior to Germany, manufactures heavy tanks 50 times faster than German industry can manage. Soviet OES, 2 design philosophy emphasizes adequate protection with overwhelming firepower from massive 122 mm gun. Soviet engineers accept crude mechanical reliability and uncomfortable crew conditions to achieve production at scale. German engineers pursue perfection, creating a tank so sophisticated that barely anyone can build it. May 1945, war's end. Final production statistics tell a devastating story. Tiger II total production, 77 vehicles across entire war. Soviet IS, 2 production, 2,718 vehicles. American Sherman, production, 49,234 vehicles. The arithmetic is brutal. Germany invested enormous resources developing a tank marginally superior to Tiger I, produced it in microscopic quantities, and deployed it when the war was already lost. Those 77 Tiger IIs, scattered across collapsing fronts, achieve impressive individual kill ratios but contribute nothing into strategic outcomes. They represent German military industrial priorities in miniature, pursuing technological excellence while ignoring production realities. Schwer Panzerabteilung 503 becomes the only Tiger II unit to achieve company-level strength, fielding approximately 30 vehicles during operations in Hungary and Austria during winter 1944-45. Battalion records describe Tiger II performance as superior to Tiger I in armor and firepower, but inferior in reliability. And transmission failures remain chronic. Final drive breakages occur with depressing regularity. One commander's report notes, "The Tiger II is an excellent tank if it's working. It rarely works." Field maintenance crews grow expert at cannibalizing broken Tigers for parts to keep others operational. By March 1945, 503 Battalion maintains 8 Tiger IIs operational from original strength of 30, with remaining vehicles destroyed, captured, or abandoned due to mechanical failure. The Tiger II's frontal armor, at 150 millimeters thickness, makes it nearly immune to most Allied anti-tank weapons of 1944, but defensive invulnerability provides marginal value when Germany lacks fuel for mobile operations, strategic reserves for counterattacks, and industrial capacity to replace losses. Tiger II units increasingly operate from static positions, their superior mobility wasted because fuel shortages prevent maneuver. The vehicles become expensive, sophisticated pillboxes using 500 horsepower engines to sit motionless in defensive trenches. Engineering culture created Tiger II. German designers, trained to pursue optimal solutions regardless of practical constraints, created a magnificent tank that exceeded every specification. But military effectiveness requires more than excellence in isolated vehicles. It requires production capacity sufficient to deploy those vehicles at scale, logistics sufficient to maintain and supply them, strategic situation where their capabilities matter, and time to field them before enemies adapt. Germany possessed none of these in 1944 when Tiger II deployment began. Yet a former Henschel engineer, Martin Schneider, interviewed in 1978, expresses bitter assessment of Tiger II program. "We built the best tank of the war, 77 of them. The Soviets built adequate tanks, thousands of them. Who won? We were idiots, brilliant idiots, pursuing perfection while our country collapsed. The Tiger II proves that excellence without quantity is historical footnote." Schneider's judgment seems harsh. It's also accurate. Tiger II represents culmination of German tank design philosophy. Sophisticated, powerful, impressive in isolation, and strategically irrelevant because produced in quantities that barely register against Allied numbers. The Tigers that never were, the hundreds or thousands Germany needed but could never build, haunt the 77 that actually existed. And those ghost tanks represent Germany's lost war as clearly as burned-out wrecks on actual battlefields. July 1944, Eastern Front near Vilnius, Lithuania. Soviet 3rd Belarusian Front commits an entire tank corps, 300 T-34 76s and T-34 85s, against German defensive positions held by Panzer Division with 40 Tiger Is and 100 Panzer IVs. The engagement begins at dawn. Soviet tanks advance in multiple echelons, accepting casualties as necessary, cost of overwhelming German defenses. By day's end, 120 Soviet tanks lie destroyed or damaged. German losses, 8 tanks, including 3 Tigers. Tactically, the battle represents German victory with 15-to-1 kill ratio. Strategically, it represents German defeat, because Soviet commanders simply reassign the battered corps to reserve, bring up fresh units, and attack the same position next week with 400 more tanks. The arithmetic of Eastern Front attrition reveals why Tigers cannot save Germany, regardless of individual superiority. Soviet factories manufacture approximately 5,000 T-34 tanks annually during peak production years of 1943 through 1944. German factories manufacture approximately 1,000 tanks annually across all types, with Tigers representing 10 to 15% of that total. The Soviet Union accepts 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 casualty ratios because replacing losses takes weeks while German replacement takes months. Soviet strategic doctrine, or formulated by officers like Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who understand industrial warfare, treats tanks as consumable ammunition rather than precious irreplaceable assets. October 1944, East Prussian offensive. Soviet assault on German defensive positions manned by 20 Tigers illustrates evolved Soviet tactics for defeating superior German armor. Soviet artillery bombards German positions for 6 hours, suppressing anti-tank guns and forcing Tigers to remain buttoned up with limited visibility. Then Soviet infantry advances, bypassing Tigers to assault infantry positions. Once German infantry retreats, isolated Tigers face impossible choice: withdraw abandoning defensive line, or hold position while Soviet forces infiltrate behind them, cutting supply lines. Most withdraw. Those that remain are destroyed not by tank combat, but by close assault teams with satchel charges, flamethrowers, and anti-tank rifles targeting vulnerable rear armor and engine compartments. Soviet T-3485, introduced in 1944, represents Soviet Union's answer to German heavy armor without trying to match German sophistication. The T-3485's 85mm gun can penetrate Tiger side armor at 600 meters, adequate for close-range combat, though inferior to Tiger's 88mm gun at long range. Soviet armor, 60mm frontal thickness with sloping, provides less protection than Tiger, but adequate against German medium tanks. Soviet design philosophy accepts that T-3485 is inferior to Tiger in direct comparison. The philosophy also recognizes that deploying 10 T-34s against 2 Tigers creates a situation where numerical superiority overwhelms individual excellence. January 1945, Vistula-Oder offensive. Soviet First Belarusian Front. 2,300 tanks and self-propelled guns attacks German Army Group Vistula, defending with 340 tanks, including 60 Tigers. The battle isn't really a battle in traditional sense. It's an overwhelming mechanical process, Soviet armor advancing on broad front while German forces fight desperate delaying actions before retreating to avoid encirclement. Tigers achieve impressive local successes. Single vehicle kills 8 Soviet tanks. Company holds Crossroad for 12 hours against 3-to-1 odds. But these tactical achievements contribute nothing to strategic outcome. And the Soviet forces advance 100 kilometers in 2 weeks, destroying or capturing most German armor in the process. The experience of German Panzer Commander during 1945 illuminates the futility of fighting superior numbers with superior vehicles. Hauptmann Klaus Weber, commanding mixed force including 4 Tigers, records in his diary during March 1945. "We destroyed 15 Russian tanks today. I reported this to division headquarters expecting congratulations. The operations officer replied, 'The Russians brought 50 more overnight. You will probably die next week.' He was correct about the numbers. I hope he is wrong about my death, but I'm not optimistic. Weber survives the war, but his unit doesn't. Soviet numerical superiority grinds down German resistance through remorseless mathematics. Yet a Soviet doctrine explicitly instructs commanders to accept disproportionate losses if doing so achieves objectives. Soviet Army Field Manual, translated after the war, includes passage that shocks Western analysts. The destruction of fascist heavy tanks is worth the sacrifice of 3 or 4 Soviet tanks. These losses are acceptable and expected. Commanders who hesitate to commit forces due to concern for casualties will be relieved. This coldly pragmatic approach treats human lives and military equipment as expendable resources in service of strategic goals. German military culture, particularly among professional officer class, finds this philosophy morally repugnant. German officers cannot comprehend treating their own soldiers and equipment so callously. But Soviet pragmatism reflects accurate strategic assessment. From July 1944 through May 1945, German forces destroy estimated 8,000 Soviet tanks through all causes. Soviet production replaces those losses within 60 days. German losses during same period: approximately 5,000 tanks across all types, representing essentially the entire remaining German armor force. German production capacity cannot replace 500 tank losses per month, let alone 5,000. The war becomes mathematical. Soviet Union can afford losing 15 tanks to destroy one Tiger, because Soviet factories build 15 tanks in the time German factories build one. Statistical analysis comparing Tiger performance on Eastern Front versus Western Front reveals how much theater conditions mattered. In the Eastern Front Tiger kill ratios during 1944, approximately 1 Tiger lost per 7 enemy vehicles destroyed. Western Front Tiger kill ratios same period: approximately 1 Tiger lost per 3 enemy vehicles destroyed. The difference reflects multiple factors: Soviet willingness to accept casualties, less favorable terrain in Western Europe for Tiger's long-range advantages, and superior Allied air power that restricts German movement. But fundamentally, Eastern Front numbers reveal that even 7-to-1 kill ratios cannot overcome 25-to-1 numerical disadvantages. May 1945, final Soviet offensive against Berlin. German forces defending the capital include approximately 30 operational Tigers from various units, the survivors of 3 years of brutal Eastern Front combat. These final Tigers achieve nothing of strategic significance. They kill Soviet tanks, delay Soviet advances by hours, and die pointlessly in rubble-strewn streets when ammunition exhausts or fuel runs out. Not one Tiger crew in Berlin believes their resistance matters anymore. They fight from habit, duty, and inability to imagine alternatives. The Soviet hammer has fallen. The sophisticated machines that were supposed to save Germany have failed. And the failure was inevitable from the moment Germany decided that technological excellence could substitute for industrial capacity and strategic realism. June 6, 1944. Operation Overlord crashes onto Normandy beaches with overwhelming force: 150,000 Allied troops, 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft. German forces in France include approximately 100 Tiger tanks, scattered across defensive positions from Normandy to Pays de Calais. Wehrmacht commanders view these Tigers as their trump card, mobile reserves capable of destroying Allied beachheads before consolidation. But within weeks, reality undermines this confidence. By August 1944, when Falaise Pocket closes and German forces retreat toward the Seine, only 40 Tigers remain operational. The other 60 are destroyed, captured, abandoned due to mechanical failure, or lost to Allied air attack. The Western Front proves to be terrain where Tiger advantages evaporate. Normandy bocage, the dense hedgerow country of northern France, creates tactical nightmare for Tiger operations. Centuries-old hedgerows, thick walls of earth and vegetation. Divide countryside into hundreds of small enclosed fields. Visibility rarely exceeds 200 meters. Roads, sunken between high banks, channel vehicle movement into predictable routes. This terrain negates every advantage Tigers possess. Their 88mm guns, capable of killing enemy tanks at 2,000 meters on open ground, become irrelevant when combat occurs at 50 meters in narrow lanes. Their heavy armor, proof against frontal assault, offers little protection when Allied infantry can approach from concealment and attack weaker side or rear armor with bazookas and sticky bombs. July 25, 1944, near St. Lo. Obersturmführer Hans Fischer commands Tiger I, positioned to block American advance. Fischer's Tiger kills 12 Sherman tanks during morning engagement and firing from concealed position where bocage provides camouflage. American forces withdraw, regroup, and call for artillery support. For 3 hours, American 105mm artillery pounds Fischer's position. The Tiger survives direct hits. Its armor withstands artillery that would destroy lighter vehicles, but the crew inside suffers concussion from repeated impacts. When artillery lifts, American fighter bombers arrive, rocketing the area. Fischer abandons his Tiger, which burns from aircraft rockets. He and his crew survive. The Tiger, which dominated tank combat all morning, is destroyed by combined arms that exploit German isolation and Allied air superiority. August 1944, Falaise Pocket. 25 German Tigers become trapped along with thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers when Canadian and American forces close encirclement. German High Command radios orders, destroy all heavy equipment rather than allow capture. Tiger commanders face agonizing decisions. These machines represent millions of Reichsmarks of investment, thousands of engineering hours, irreplaceable manufacturing capacity. Destroying them violates every instinct. But escape is impossible. Allied air power owns the skies. Allied armor controls every route. Tiger crews place demolition charges in their vehicles, withdraw to minimum safe distance, and detonate them. Only 6 Tigers escape Falaise. The 19 destroyed represent nearly 20% of all Tigers deployed in France. September 17, 1944. And Operation Market Garden begins. British airborne forces drop behind German lines in Netherlands, attempting to capture bridges at Arnhem, an open route into northern Germany. British paratroopers discover to their horror that Arnhem contains Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 101, including approximately 30 Tiger tanks refitting after Normandy campaign. The Tigers, positioned defensively around Arnhem, transform urban combat into shooting gallery. British anti-tank weapons, 6-pounder and 17-pounder guns, can penetrate Tiger armor, but only at close range in urban environment where Tigers hold every advantage. Buildings provide firing positions. Narrow streets channel British movement. The Tigers don't need mobility. They need only to sit and fire. The Arnhem engagement reveals how dramatically terrain affects Tiger effectiveness. On open ground where mobility matters, Tiger's weight and mechanical unreliability create vulnerabilities. In urban or close terrain where defensive positioning dominates, Tigers become nearly invulnerable fortifications. British forces at Arnhem lose dozens of armored vehicles to Tigers that never move more than 200 meters from their initial positions. But this defensive success contributes nothing to German strategic situation. Market Garden fails for multiple reasons beyond German resistance. The Tigers at Arnhem kill British soldiers and destroy British equipment without preventing Allied advance elsewhere or restoring German offensive capability. December 16, 1944. Ardennes offensive begins. Germany's last major counteroffensive in the West, throwing remaining strategic reserves, including 130 Tigers at American positions in Belgian forests. Hitler plans to split Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force negotiated settlement. Initial attacks achieve surprise and local success, but within 72 hours, offensive momentum stalls from causes that tanks cannot overcome. Fuel shortages that immobilize entire panzer divisions. Supply line disruptions from partisan attacks and traffic congestion, command confusion from overlapping orders and unrealistic objectives, and American defensive resilience that trades space for time until reinforcements arrive. Tiger performance during the Ardennes demonstrates how completely strategic circumstances have changed from 1942. The Tigers deployed in December 1944 are mechanically superior to earlier production runs. Improved transmissions, better crew training, refined tactical doctrine. But these improvements matter less than context. Germany lacks fuel to sustain mobile operations beyond initial attacks. Wehrmacht logistics cannot supply ammunition and spare parts across extended supply lines. Allied air power, grounded by fog during the offensive's first days, returns with devastating effect once weather clears. Individual Tiger superiority cannot overcome systematic German weaknesses. American tank destroyer crews, battle-hardened from months of European combat, no longer fear Tigers the way soldiers did in 1943. M36, Jackson tank destroyers, M10 Wolverines, and even upgunned Sherman Fireflies possess weapons capable of killing Tigers at combat ranges. American doctrine emphasizes combined arms. Artillery suppresses German positions, infantry fixes German movement. Tank destroyers engage armor from advantageous positions, and air power interdicts supplies and reinforcements. Tigers excel at one-dimensional armor combat. They struggle against multidimensional threats, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Comparative analysis of Tiger effectiveness in Eastern versus Western theaters reveals startling differences. Eastern Front, 1943 through 1944, Tigers achieve average kill ratios of approximately 7 enemy vehicles destroyed per Tiger lost. Western Front, same period, approximately 3 enemy vehicles destroyed per Tiger lost, a reduction of more than 50%. The difference reflects multiple factors beyond simple tactical competence. Eastern Front features open terrain, favoring long-range gunnery where Tigers dominate. Western Front features enclosed terrain, bocage, forests, urban areas, where combat occurs at ranges that negate Tiger advantages. Eastern Front features Soviet armor doctrine accepting high casualties. Western Front features Allied doctrine that avoids frontal assault in favor of artillery, air power, and positional warfare. By January 1945, surviving Tigers in Western Europe operate primarily from static defensive positions because fuel shortages prevent mobile operations. American and British forces learn to bypass fortified Tiger positions rather than assault them directly, isolating German strongpoints until artillery or air power can eliminate them. The Western Front becomes theater where Tiger tactical superiority matters least, where Germany's most sophisticated weapon contributes little to delaying inevitable Allied victory. The Western question, did Tigers matter in Europe, receives uncomfortable answer. Tactically, they succeeded in individual engagements. Strategically, they failed to influence campaign outcomes. And ultimately, they represented wasted resources deployed when Germany needed quantity more than quality. The Tigers fought well in the West, but fighting well while losing everything is its own form of failure. October 1942, North Africa. Unteroffizier Heinrich Becker sits in his Tiger I's gunner position, eye pressed to the Zeiss optic, at watching a British Crusader tank maneuver 800 meters distant. His commander orders, "Target, tank, fire." Becker's finger squeezes the trigger. The 88mm gun erupts with violence that makes his teeth ache. Through the optic, he watches the shell strike Crusader's turret. The British tank explodes, turret lifting into the air, trailing fire. Becker sees tiny figures, men, burning men, crawl from the wreckage. It's his first kill. He vomits inside his mask. His commander pretends not to notice. The Tiger's interior is 14 cubic meters of cramped steel housing, 5 men, and enough ammunition to destroy a platoon. Summer temperatures inside the tank regularly exceed 55 degrees Celsius, hot enough that crew members suffer heat exhaustion after hours of operations. Metal surfaces become too hot to touch unprotected. The engine compartment, separated from the crew by thin firewall, radiates heat like a furnace. Crews learn to wear minimum clothing during combat operations, then bundle up immediately afterward as sweat evaporates and hypothermia becomes a risk during cold months. Some crews keep wet towels to drape over their heads, providing minimal cooling that makes difference between consciousness and heat stroke. June 1943. Eastern Front. Feldwebel Kurt Müller writes letter home that Soviet intelligence intercepts. Müller describes his crew's physical deterioration. The gunner's right arm is permanently damaged. A shell casing exploded during extraction, showering his forearm with burning brass. The loader has lost 4 teeth. The gun's recoil jars them loose every time we fire. I can barely hear anymore. The doctors say it's permanent. We are 20 years old and crippled from our own weapon. Müller's account reveals occupational hazards that military medicine doesn't classify as combat injuries, but that disable crews as effectively as enemy fire. The 88mm gun's recoil generates forces measured in tons. Despite recoil suppression systems, firing produces shock that reverberates through the entire crew compartment. Loaders, standing directly behind the breech during firing, absorb repeated impacts against the turret rear. Experienced loaders develop instinct for bracing themselves microseconds before firing, but exhaustion and combat stress make this impossible to maintain consistently. Medical reports from 1944 document cumulative injuries among Tiger crews, fractured ribs, or spinal compression, internal bruising, and chronic musculoskeletal damage from repetitive mechanical trauma. July 1944, Normandy. American intelligence recovers Tiger, one abandoned near Villers-Bocage after crew escaped encirclement. Inside, investigators find evidence of desperate final moments. Empty shell casings piled waist-deep, blood smeared across commander's position from shrapnel wounds, emergency medical supplies scattered and partially used, and handwritten note wedged in gunner's optics. To whoever finds this, we fought as long as we could. Tell our families we did our duty. The note is signed by all 5 crew members. 3 of them died when American tank destroyer penetrated the Tiger's rear armor as they attempted withdrawal. The other 2 died from wounds before reaching friendly lines. Soviet accounts of capturing disabled Tigers reveal conditions crew members endured. February 1945, Eastern Front near Königsberg. Soviet tankers discover abandoned Tiger 1, engine dead, tracks damaged, but otherwise intact. Inside the crew compartment, all 5 German crew members sit frozen in their positions, literally frozen, dead from hypothermia during winter retreat. The Tiger ran out of fuel 3 days earlier. The crew, unable to restart the engine for heat, chose to stay with their vehicle rather than abandon it. They died from cold inside a machine designed to withstand anti-tank fire, but helpless against Russian winter. Soviet commander orders the bodies removed respectfully. Even enemies deserve dignity in death. The psychological burden of operating Tigers manifests in letters, diaries, and post-war testimonies. Crew members describe constant awareness that they occupy the most hunted vehicles on the battlefield, that every enemy gun prioritizes Tigers, that capture means certain imprisonment or death. They operate knowing their tanks are mechanically unreliable, that transmission failure might immobilize them under fire, that fuel shortages could strand them in enemy territory. The Tiger provides illusion of invulnerability through heavy armor, but crew members understand vulnerability intimately through experience of friends dying in supposedly impregnable machines. May 1945, final days of war. Oberscharführer Wilhelm Schroeder surrenders his Tiger 1 crew to American forces near Munich. Schroeder describes his emotions in later interviews. "We knew by March that Germany had lost. Every soldier knew. But we kept fighting because stopping meant SS execution squads for desertion. The Tiger gave us purpose. We could kill 10 Russians for every German life. It was meaningless, but it was all we had. I hated that tank. It killed my friends through mechanical failure, through being slow, through being a target every enemy wanted to destroy. But I also loved it because inside that steel shell, I felt like a god. We were 19-year-old boys playing gods while our country collapsed." Statistical analysis of Tiger crew casualty rates reveals the human cost of operating these machines. Approximately 35% of Tiger crew members deployed between 1942 and 1945 became casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. This compares to approximately 28% casualty rates for medium tank crews during the same period. The increased risk reflects Tiger's prominence on battlefields. Enemy forces concentrate fire against them, and their mechanical unreliability, which leaves crews stranded more frequently than crews in more reliable vehicles. Post-war medical studies of surviving Tiger crew members document long-term health impacts. Hearing loss affects nearly 80% of surviving gunners and commanders, the result of operating in enclosed steel compartments where every gun firing, every engine noise, and every impact echoes with destructive intensity. Musculoskeletal problems, chronic back pain, joint damage, repetitive stress injuries affect 60% of survivors. Psychological trauma, although poorly understood in immediate post-war period, manifests in nightmares, anxiety disorders, and what later generations would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. The Tiger's crew members were Germany's elite, selected for intelligence, physical fitness, and psychological stability. They received the best training Wehrmacht could provide, operated the most sophisticated equipment Germany produced, and fought with skill that earned grudging respect from enemies. But they were also young men, average age 22, thrust into mechanical monsters that demanded everything while providing protection that proved illusory against determined enemies. They lived, fought, and often died inside 14 cubic meters of armored steel that history remembers as invincible, but that they knew was just another way to die. The legend celebrates the machine. The reality killed the men. And the men ultimately are what war consumes, regardless of how excellent the machines they operate. 1948, Nuremberg. Allied interrogators question former Wehrmacht General Heinz Guderian about German tank development during the war. Guderian, architect of German Panzer Doctrine and one of history's most innovative armor commanders, provides assessment that contradicts popular narratives already forming. The Tiger was adequate but not revolutionary. It was heavily armored, well-armed, but fundamentally an incremental improvement over existing designs rather than a paradigm shift. Our production shortages and crew training deficits were greater limitations than any technical specifications. We lost not because our tanks were inferior, but because we couldn't build or man them in sufficient numbers. Guderian's testimony, buried in classified interrogation transcripts for decades, challenges the Tiger mythology before that mythology fully crystallizes. 1950s. Western military publications, American, British, French, begin analyzing World War II's armored campaigns. The Tiger tank emerges as centerpiece of these analyses, portrayed as revolutionary design that nearly changed the war's outcome. Books with titles like German Superweapons and The Tiger, Hitler's Secret Weapon, populate military bookstores and public libraries. Photographs of Tigers in action become iconic images of German military excellence. The narrative solidifies. Tigers were the best tanks of the war, capable of destroying Allied armor at will. Stopped only by overwhelming Allied numbers and strategic mistakes by German high command. This narrative becomes military orthodoxy, taught at staff colleges, and accepted uncritically by generations of historians. 1970s. Soviet archives begin limited openings as Cold War tensions ease slightly. Soviet military historians provide contradictory analysis to Western narratives. Soviet records show Tiger kill-loss ratios, calculated from Soviet tank unit reports rather than German claims, averaging much lower than Western sources suggest. Where German records claim single Tigers destroyed 20 or 30 Soviet tanks, Soviet records acknowledge maybe 8 or 10 losses in corresponding engagements. The discrepancy reveals how propaganda and combat confusion inflate claims on all sides. Oh, how battlefield chaos makes accurate casualty assessment nearly impossible, and how post-war narratives reflect political needs as much as historical truth. 1998. Dissolution of Soviet Union makes previously classified military archives accessible to Western researchers. Detailed Soviet tank loss records, German unit reports captured by Soviets, and operational analyses compiled by Soviet intelligence services become available. Military historians begin comprehensive reassessment of Tiger combat effectiveness, using primary sources from both sides. The picture emerging from these sources contradicts decades of accepted wisdom. Tiger kill ratios, calculated from matched German and Soviet records rather than single-source claims, average perhaps 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, rather than the 10-to-1 or higher figures in popular accounts. 2010s. Statistical analysis using modern computational methods allows researchers to cross-reference thousands of individual combat reports, matching German claims against Allied and Soviet loss records. The conclusions challenge fundamental assumptions about Tiger effectiveness. In well-documented engagements where both German and Allied/Soviet records exist, German kill claims exceed confirmed Allied/Soviet losses by factors of 2 to 3. The discrepancy isn't deliberate falsification. It's inherent to combat reporting. Crews claim destroyed vehicles that were actually disabled and later recovered. Multiple crews claim the same destroyed vehicle. Vehicles knocked out by artillery or air attack are credited to tanks. If the fog of war makes accurate assessment impossible in real time, technical reassessment using modern engineering analysis reveals Tiger 1 specifications, while impressive for 1942, represented evolutionary rather than revolutionary development. The Tiger's 100mm frontal armor was superior to contemporary British and American tanks, but not dramatically so, approximately 50% thicker than American M4 Sherman 65mm armor in comparable locations. Soviet T-34 sloped armor, though nominally thinner at 45mm, provided equivalent protection through angling that increased effective thickness. Although the Tiger's 88mm gun was powerful but not unique, Soviet 85mm and American 90mm guns developed during the war achieved comparable performance. Comparative weapons analysis, conducted by United States Army Ordnance Technical Center in 1946, concluded that Tiger I represented excellent engineering within conventional design parameters rather than revolutionary breakthrough. The report noted that Tigers excelled in specific tactical scenarios, long-range gunnery on open terrain, but possessed significant vulnerabilities: mechanical unreliability, excessive weight limiting mobility, high production cost, limiting availability, and specialized maintenance requirements. The report concluded that American Sherman tanks, while individually inferior to Tigers in direct combat, provided superior strategic value through reliability, ease of production, and numerical availability. Declassified Soviet analysis from 1990s reveals similar conclusions from opposing perspective. Soviet military engineers examining captured Tigers acknowledged German engineering quality while questioning strategic wisdom of the design. Soviet report notes: the German Tiger prioritizes individual vehicle superiority over operational availability. Soviet doctrine recognizes that adequate tanks produced in quantity provide greater combat power than excellent tanks produced in scarcity. The Tiger's technical excellence cannot compensate for its strategic insufficiency. This pragmatic assessment reflects Soviet philosophy that would dominate Cold War armor development. Good enough in sufficient numbers defeats excellent in insufficient numbers. The deconstruction of Tiger mythology raises uncomfortable questions about military history generally. How much of what we know about weapons, battles, and campaigns is actually propaganda, wishful thinking, or post-war rationalization? The Tiger became legendary partly through genuine combat effectiveness, but also through German propaganda designed to boost morale, Allied propaganda designed to justify increased military spending, and Cold War narratives emphasizing Nazi Germany's technological sophistication to explain how democratic nations could have struggled against them. The real Tiger, a well-designed tank with significant flaws, produced in inadequate numbers, operated by increasingly inexperienced crews, deployed in situations where its advantages often didn't matter, is far less dramatic than the mythological Tiger. Final statistical assessment, synthesizing decades of research and thousands of primary documents, provides sobering conclusion. The Tiger I was a superior tank in specific tactical circumstances. In open terrain at long range with experienced crew, it dominated contemporaries. But it was mechanically unreliable, expensive to produce, difficult to maintain, and vulnerable to the same combined arms tactics that defeated all armored vehicles. It achieved impressive kill ratios in favorable conditions, but couldn't prevent strategic defeat because Germany lacked the industrial capacity to produce Tigers at scales necessary for decisive impact. The Tiger's reputation as war-changing superweapon is mythology. The reality is more prosaic, an excellent tank that couldn't overcome its own limitations or Germany's strategic weaknesses. The legend serves human need for simple narratives about technological excellence. The truth serves historical understanding about war's complexity. The legend is more popular. The truth is more important. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Among the thousands of military vehicles captured by Allied forces across Europe, approximately 250 to 300 Tiger tanks remain in various states of functionality. Some are operational, their crews having surrendered rather than fighting to destruction. Others sit disabled by mechanical failure, abandoned when fuel or spare parts ran out. Still others are damaged in combat, repairable but immobilized. These surviving Tigers represent roughly 18% of total production, a higher survival rate than many expected, given the Tiger's reputation for being hunted relentlessly by every Allied gun. The machines, designed to save an empire, have outlived that empire. The paradox is almost poetic. Summer 1945. Allied occupation forces begin cataloging captured German military equipment. Soviet Union claims several Tiger IS for detailed technical evaluation, shipping them to proving grounds near Moscow, where engineers will disassemble them completely to understand German manufacturing techniques. American forces transport multiple examples to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where they'll be tested against American anti-tank weapons to validate that existing weapons can defeat German armor. British forces examine Tigers captured in France and Germany, photographing, measuring, and documenting every component for inclusion in post-war intelligence assessments. The fates of individual Tigers reveal how completely the war's context has changed. Tiger 131, captured by British forces in Tunisia in April 1943, becomes the only fully operational Tiger in Allied hands. British engineers restore it to running condition, test it extensively, and eventually place it in the Tank Museum at Bovington, where it remains today. This single tank, which terrorized British soldiers during North Africa campaign, becomes museum exhibit visited by tourists photographing their children standing beside it. The transformation from weapon to artifact encapsulates how military equipment's meaning changes when wars end. In 1950s through 60s, surviving Tigers transition from military hardware to historical artifacts. Museums across Europe and North America acquire examples for permanent display. The German Tank Museum in Munster obtains several Tigers in various conditions. Soviet Union displays captured Tiger in Moscow's Central Armed Forces Museum, presenting it as trophy demonstrating Soviet victory over fascism. American museums acquire examples as educational exhibits showing enemy capabilities American soldiers faced. Each Tiger on display carries interpretive signage explaining its specifications, combat history, and significance. The machines become teaching tools, their violent purposes sanitized through museum contexts. 1990s. Though museum curators and military historians begin treating surviving tigers as primary historical documents, objects that can be interrogated for information about manufacturing, operations, and combat effectiveness. Tigers were built with serial numbers stamped on major components, allowing researchers to trace individual vehicles through archival records. Tiger RM-254, displayed at German Tank Museum, is traced to Schwerpanzerabteilung 502, service on Eastern Front from July 1943 through January 1945, participation in 8 major engagements, confirmed destruction of 8 Soviet tanks, probable destruction of 5 more, and abandonment near Königsberg when fuel exhausted in final weeks of war. Yet a physical examination of surviving tigers reveals evidence of operational stress invisible in archival documents. Museum conservators, performing maintenance on display vehicles, discover hasty repairs using non-standard parts, indicating field maintenance performed under combat conditions. They find improvised armor patches welded over damaged sections, showing battlefield repairs that got tanks operational again without factory-level facilities. They document wear patterns on transmission components, confirming engineering reports about mechanical stress. Surviving tigers become archaeological evidence, physical artifacts whose material properties provide information that paper records cannot. 2020. Only 7 Tiger I tanks survive in museums worldwide from original production of 1,376 vehicles. And the survival rate, approximately 0.5%, is lower than many expected. By comparison, approximately 40 to 50 Soviet T-3485s survive from production of 5,219, a survival rate of roughly 0.9%. The slightly higher Soviet survival rate likely reflects 2 factors: greater total production providing more candidates for preservation, and Soviet state policy of preserving war trophies as national monuments. Tigers, produced in smaller numbers and scrapped by nations that wanted to forget the war, face lower preservation probability. The disparity between Tiger survival rates and survival rates of other German tank models reveals interesting patterns. Approximately 20 Panzer IV examples survive from production of 8,550 vehicles, a survival rate of approximately 0.2%, lower than Tiger's survival rate. Approximately 35 Panther tanks survive from production of 6,000 units, a survival rate of approximately 0.6%, slightly higher than Tiger rate. The variations reflect multiple factors: which models museums prioritized for preservation, which examples were readily available in immediate post-war period, and which vehicles captured public imagination sufficiently to justify preservation expense. The symbolic resonance of Tiger survival outlasting Nazi Germany is not lost on historians and museum educators. The tanks were created to defend regime that collapsed while the tanks remained physically intact. The machines designed to ensure thousand-year Reich's supremacy now sit in museums explaining that Reich's defeat. Visitors photograph themselves beside Tigers, children climb on them in some venues, tour guides explain their specifications in neutral educational tones that drain all political meaning from their existence. The Tigers survive as empty shells, their purposes obsolete, their crews dead or aged beyond recognition, serving only as 3-dimensional history lessons about war's material culture. Former Tiger crew members, visiting museums where their old vehicles sit displayed, describe profound disconnect between memory and artifact. Obersturmführer Hans Weber, visiting Bovington Tank Museum in 1985, sees Tiger 131, not his vehicle, but identical model, and writes in visitor book, "I commanded one of these. It was loud, hot, and terrifying. In museums it looks peaceful, even beautiful. A war is neither peaceful nor beautiful. Don't forget that when you photograph your children on this machine." Weber's comment captures the gap between historical memory and material artifact, between lived experience of violence and sanitized presentation of violence's tools. The machines survived. The Empire did not. This simple fact contains profound historical irony. Nazi leadership invested enormous resources creating weapons like Tigers to guarantee German dominance. Those weapons outlasted the regime by 70-plus years, but only as museum pieces testifying to that regime's defeat. The Tigers demonstrate simultaneously German engineering excellence and German strategic bankruptcy, technological sophistication and industrial insufficiency, tactical success and strategic failure. Oh, they survive as monuments to everything Germany did right and everything Germany did wrong during the war. The machines endure, but they endure as evidence of their own irrelevance, preserved precisely because they failed to achieve their purpose. History remembers the Tigers, but history remembers them as magnificent failures, sophisticated weapons that couldn't prevent inevitable defeat. May 8th, 1945. 3 years, 8 months after first Tigers entered combat, Germany surrenders. The war is over. Tiger tanks, once thought unstoppable, could not prevent this outcome. Scattered across Europe lie 1,376 Tigers worth of production effort, some destroyed in combat, some captured intact, some abandoned when fuel ran out, some cannibalized for parts. They achieved impressive individual success stories, killed thousands of Allied soldiers, destroyed thousands of Allied vehicles, and earned fearsome reputation among enemies. But they failed at their ultimate purpose, preventing German defeat. That failure teaches more useful lessons than their successes ever could. 1950s, Cold War intensifies. Western military planners study World War II's armored campaigns, extracting lessons for possible future conflict with Soviet Union. Two competing philosophies emerge from Tiger analysis. British approach emphasizes incremental improvement. Develop tanks that balance mobility, armor, and firepower. Produce them in adequate numbers. Maintain them reliably. Yes, American approach pursues revolutionary design. Develop dramatically superior vehicles that overwhelm opponents through technological advantage. The M60 Patton tank represents American philosophy in action. Heavy armor, powerful gun, sophisticated fire control. British Centurion represents their approach: good enough protection, adequate firepower, exceptional reliability. Both schools cite Tigers as supporting evidence for their positions. Soviet Union draws different conclusions from Tiger experience than Western powers. Soviet armor development through 1950s and 60s prioritizes numerical superiority with adequate technology over individual vehicle excellence. Soviet T-54 and T-55 medium tanks, produced in quantities exceeding 50,000 units, embody this philosophy. Good enough armor to survive hits from contemporary weapons, adequate guns to penetrate contemporary armor, reliable enough to operate with minimal maintenance, and cheap enough to manufacture at scale that overwhelms opponents. Soviet designers explicitly studied Tiger production numbers versus Soviet production numbers and concluded that quantity ultimately defeated quality. 1973, Yom Kippur War. Israeli Defense Forces, equipped with American M48 Patton tanks and British Centurions, face Egyptian forces equipped with Soviet T-54 and T-55 tanks. The engagement tests competing armor philosophies in actual combat. Israeli tanks possess superior optics, better crew training, and more sophisticated fire control. Egyptian tanks possess numerical superiority, approximately 3-to-1 advantage in deployed vehicles. The outcome hinges not on technology, but on training, doctrine, and tactical execution. Israeli forces achieved decisive victory despite numerical disadvantage, suggesting that crew quality matters more than vehicle quantity. But Egyptian forces inflict significant casualties before defeat, demonstrating that adequate technology in sufficient numbers forces even superior opponents to pay heavy prices. Military strategists recognize patterns repeating from Tiger experience. Technological superiority provides tactical advantages that disappear when opponents adapt. Numerical superiority overwhelms individual excellence through attrition. Crew training and tactical doctrine matter as much as vehicle specifications. Now, logistical sustainability determines long-term effectiveness more than short-term combat performance. These lessons remain relevant 60 years after Tigers first deployed, but are constantly relearned by military establishments that prioritize current crisis over historical understanding. 2001 through present. Modern asymmetric conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere test Western military technology against opponents using Soviet-era equipment and irregular tactics. American forces deploy sophisticated armor, M1 Abrams tanks with composite armor, digital fire control, gas turbine engines. Opponents use decades-old T-72s, improvised explosive devices, and ambush tactics. American armor achieves overwhelming tactical success in direct combat, losing perhaps one tank for every 50 enemy vehicles destroyed. But insurgent opponents avoid direct combat, using roadside bombs and ambushes that exploit vulnerabilities sophisticated armor cannot protect against. The pattern echoes. Tiger experience. Technological excellence provides advantages in specific tactical scenarios, but cannot overcome determined opponents who refuse to fight on terms that favor that technology. 2024, analysis by defense policy researchers concludes that Tiger tank history illuminates fundamental tension in modern military procurement. Nations face choice, develop small numbers of exquisite systems maximizing technological advantage, or develop larger numbers of adequate systems ensuring availability and sustainability. American F-35 fighter program represents exquisite approach, revolutionary capabilities, astronomical development costs, limited production numbers. Chinese J-20 program represents adequate approach, good enough capabilities, controlled costs, larger projected production. The debate continues. Tiger argument 80 years later. Quality versus quantity, excellence versus adequacy, sophisticated scarcity versus simple abundance. The Tiger's production cost, estimated at 250,000 Reichsmarks per vehicle in 1943, could have produced 2 to 3 Panzer IV medium tanks with comparable aggregate firepower and greater tactical flexibility. German armor forces committed to Kursk offensive with 211 Tigers might have fielded 600 Panzer IVs instead, creating different tactical situation through sheer numbers. And whether this alternative would have changed outcomes is debatable. Kursk failed for multiple reasons beyond tank numbers, but it illustrates how production choices create force structure consequences that determine what's operationally possible. Modern military professionals, studying Tiger history, extract lessons applicable to current challenges. Technological superiority is temporary. Opponents eventually develop countermeasures. Production capacity matters more than individual unit excellence when conflicts extend beyond initial engagements. Crew training and tactical doctrine amplify or negate technological advantages. Logistical sustainability determines whether sophisticated equipment can be maintained operationally. Complex systems require specialized support infrastructure that may not exist in combat theaters. These lessons appear obvious in retrospect, but are regularly ignored by military establishments pursuing technological solutions to strategic problems. The Tiger tank represents more than just a weapon system that failed to prevent German defeat. It represents entire military-industrial philosophy that prioritizes technological excellence over operational sustainability, that believes sophisticated weapons can compensate for strategic disadvantages, that invests resources in perfect solutions when adequate solutions would serve better. Nazi Germany's obsession with revolutionary superweapons, Tigers, jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, wonder weapons that would turn the tide, distracted from fundamental problems, insufficient industrial capacity, inadequate resource base, hostile population in occupied territories, An allied coalition with greater aggregate power. Technology cannot overcome those fundamental disadvantages, regardless of how excellent that technology is. The final lesson from Tiger Legend is perhaps most important. Military history is constructed narrative as much as factual record. The Tiger's reputation as unstoppable superweapon was built partly through real combat effectiveness, but substantially through propaganda, post-war myth-making, and human attraction to dramatic narratives about technological sophistication. Historical truth that Tigers were excellent tanks that couldn't overcome Germany's strategic weaknesses is less compelling than legend of invincible machines, stopped only by overwhelming numbers. But truth serves understanding better than legend. We remember Tigers as legendary because the legend is dramatic. We should study Tigers as historical reality, because reality teaches useful lessons about war's complexity, technology's limitations, and the gap between tactical excellence and strategic wisdom. The legend entertains, the reality educates, and education ultimately might prevent future generations from repeating mistakes that all the legendary Tigers in the world couldn't prevent Germany from making.